For the male protagonist, such a strong enemy, Edward expressed that he enjoys fighting strong opponents the most. This time, the male protagonist successfully ignited his fury. Let this battle become even more intense. The clash between modern weapons and those from the cultivation world. Which one is truly more powerful? The answer to this question will soon be revealed. After all, this war for the male protagonist is a cross-century battle. Edward, who has been knocked down time and again, finally couldn't hold back and used his ultimate move. Seeing his opponent's serious attitude, the protagonist felt it was time to show his true strength. Then Edward suddenly leapt into the air, and his limbs began to detach from his body. They broke down into 4 missiles, aimed at the protagonist. This was his ultimate special attack. Then with a whoosh, the 4 missiles shot toward the protagonist. But at the protagonist's speed, these missiles simply can't hit him. Although he dodged the missiles, the 4 missiles are controlled by Edward's mind. So, even if they miss him, the missiles will keep pursuing him. After Edward's relentless efforts, he finally seizes an opportunity. What's it like to pick up a beautiful female disciple at the start? The male lead even thought about getting intimate right away. The thought is pretty good, but it's not feasible. After all, I'm a respectable blogger. The male lead just made a casual joke. The girl immediately disliked him. Do kids nowadays have such weak psychological resilience? There was no other way. The male lead had no choice but to carry the girl back and teach her slowly. Who could blame him for being kind to a beautiful girl? As for why the girl appeared here out of the blue, it all began a few hours ago. He was being chased at the time. And the one chasing him was his own senior sister. What was even harder for him to accept was that they were sent to take his spiritual route. Despair made him understand the cruelty of the world. Even after transmigrating to this world, it was still the same. Then, the sound of the pouring rain gradually covered his crying. Forget it, let it end like this. However, when he opened his eyes, he found himself in an unfamiliar place. And he didn't have Go Dan anymore, but his clothes were gone. He recalled the sound he heard before he died. Could it be that he saved himself? After he calmed down, he found that there was a portrait of Mona Lisa from Earth hanging on the wall. Just as he was filled with amazement, the male protagonist pushed open the door at that moment. The sight before him made him linger. He couldn't even help but drool. After all, that's a perfect 82/56:83 body proportion. Before the girl could react, he threw a shoe at her. However, the shameless male lead didn't care. He even complimented his own amazing physique. Seeing the male lead getting closer and closer, the girl yelled, "Pervert, don't come near me." But the only response she got from him was a simple question: "Is this how you treat your savior?" Hearing this, the girl realized that his voice was very similar to the one who saved her before. Faced with the girl's questioning, the male lead acted cool and said, "Otherwise, who would be as kind as me? When I met you in the ghostly forest, you were barely alive. I felt sorry for you." So he brought it back, and learned the whole story. The girl didn't ask any further. Instead, she pointed at the Mona Lisa on the wall and asked how he got it. The fact that she knew the name of the painting made the male lead a little incredulous. Could she also be a time traveler from Earth? Faced with this question, one of them was wearing a light yellow long dress. The other one had her fluffy hair done. They got the answer they wanted. They hugged each other happily, confirming that the other person was a fellow countryman from Earth. In their joy, the girl forgot that she wasn't wearing any clothes. At first, he didn't seem to notice. Only he noticed the different sensation. Until the blanket covering him fell off. A breathtaking scene unfolded before him. The girl finally realized it. She turned around to cover herself, but he was already burning with passion. His nose started bleeding profusely. Then the girl kicked him so hard he flew miles away. The scene shifts. At this moment, the girl appears on screen wearing a maid outfit. Blushing, she asks if she could have a normal Taoist robe. This rare benefit, the male lead wouldn't let it go. "Sorry. That tattered one is unwearable. It's constrained by the conditions. Only this size fits you." "Okay, let's not talk about that. Take a look at this contract first." Hearing about signing a contract, the girl immediately became cautious. Then the man explained, "I've met more beautiful women than the grains of rice you've eaten. Someone like you won't be able to break my virginity." Hearing that the man was still a virgin, the girl started teasing him. "You're so skilled, I thought you were amazing. So you're still a virgin?" Then she opened the male lead's contract, and it was actually an acceptance letter from Yintian Academy. Just as he was confused, the male lead started explaining, "You seem homeless. Why don't you just join our Yintian Academy? It just so happens that our academy is short-staffed. Don't worry about the tuition fees for now." Initially, the girl was still a bit hesitant. After all, the male lead didn't look like a decent person. But if she didn't sign, where else could she go? She pondered for a long time. Finally, she still signed and sealed it. The moment she pressed her fingerprint, with a loud bang, a beam of aurora descended from the sky. This scene was also witnessed by a group of people waiting outside. They were the male lead's disciples: Guang, Jinglin, Yuanjiang, Xiaoguang, Guxing, and Jiang Yuetian. After he finished signing, the male lead took back the contract, and was about to take him to meet his disciples. But he interrupted her. She said in surprise, "Was that just now, heavenly justice?" Facing the girl's reaction, the male lead seemed to be used to it. He didn't pay any attention to it. He still wanted to take her to see his disciples waiting outside. But for the girl, heavenly justice was a matter of utmost importance. After all, every appearance of heavenly justice is accompanied by a world war. Because only when the leader of a race reaches the cultivation level of a due Saint 7 will it trigger heavenly revelation. But Do Saint Sevens haven't appeared for 100 years. Why can his contract summon heavenly justice? Could his cultivation have already reached? He always looks so carefree. I never imagined his cultivation would be at the Do Saint 7 level. Who exactly is he? To find out what was going on, he followed the male lead's footsteps. Cut to the training ground where the male lead usually trained his disciples. The male lead's disciples had been waiting for a while. Jiang Shaoguang even started to guess whether the newly arrived junior sister was cute or seductive. This question angered Jiang Yuetian. They almost got into a fight because of it. If they weren't afraid of the male lead seeing them, they would have already started fighting. But their arguing scene was still seen by the male lead, who rushed over. Just as he was about to scold them, the next second, they stood neatly in a row, greeting the male lead, reporting to the teacher. All 5 people are present. Please give instructions, since they are like this. The male lead can't really go and scold them either. He can only introduce the girl beside him first. But he is very nervous at this moment. This girl's name is Yi Yuchuan. She will be your junior sister Lu from now on. And Yi Yuchuan also shyly greeted them. Their welcoming ceremony was also particularly grand. This fervent enthusiasm was a bit overwhelming for Yi Yuxian. Unable to bear it, he turned around and hid behind the male lead. Looking at the bashful Yi Yuxian, the male lead had no choice but to push him forward again, saying, "Don't be shy, quickly greet your 4 senior brothers and 1 senior sister." Seeing that he couldn't avoid it, Yi Yuxian had no choice but to reluctantly engage. Just as he was about to greet them one by one, he seemed to notice something amiss. Looking at the 5 people before him, no matter how he looked at it, it should have been 3 senior brothers and 2 senior sisters. Why did the male lead say it was 4 senior brothers and 1 senior sister? This left him a bit confused. Regarding his question, the male lead had anticipated this. He then came to Jiang Yuetian's side. Pointing at his flawless skin, he said, "This is your 2nd senior brother, Jiang Yuetian." The next second, the male lead lifted his qipao, saying, "Actually, his true identity is male." The male lead's mischievous prank made Yi Yuchuan blush. She also said, "You rascal. This is my precious first time." Jiang Yuetian, standing beside them, could no longer bear it. He was seen leaping into the air. During his descent, his heel slammed heavily onto the male lead's head. With a loud bang, the force was so great that it shattered the ground into pieces. Seeing Jiang Yuetian's anger, Yi Yuchuan realized that this simple and brutal kick was even stronger than the elders of the Tianbei Gate she used to be in. Even such a powerful strike failed to injure the male lead in the slightest. Only a large pit appeared on the ground. The male lead said casually, "Is it just because I lifted your skirt? You brat, I have everything you have. Or are you emotionally attached to wearing women's clothes? Really think you're a girl now? Don't be shy. I know that cross-dressing only has a first time and countless times afterwards. It's not about that." Looking at this unserious teacher of his, he actually withstood the assault of the sudden change in art style. Yet, it didn't harm him in the slightest. What exactly is his cultivation level? Facing Jiang Yuetian, whose anger was at its peak, the male lead still recklessly patted his head, saying, "It's okay. Your master will raise you well as a girl." Next, as you can imagine, taking advantage of the male lead's inattention, she attacked him again. It's a pity that he easily blocked it. These scenes shocked Yi Yuchuan, who was standing nearby, speechless. But soon, the commotion ended. The male lead instructed them to continue practicing. He himself said that he had some matters to attend to with their junior sister. Then he took Yi Yuchuan and left. Scene change. He was taken by the male lead to a secluded corner. At this moment, the male lead pinned him against the wall, seemingly about to do something indecent. And Yi Yuchuan resisted with all his might. But he was easily subdued by the male lead. After all, the male lead was far too powerful for him. Then, taking advantage of Yi Yuchuan's inattention, he placed his hand on his abdomen. Faced with the male lead's sudden touch, Yi Yuchuan's face flushed instantly. Her body trembled. However, her expression when looking at the male lead seemed to show no feelings towards him. But Yi Yuchuan's breathing had already become rapid. Her face flushed red. As time passed little by little, the male lead also started to exert force on her abdomen. Finally, Yi Yuchuan felt an unprecedented sensation. It seemed like she had reached the peak. But what she got in return was the male lead's merciless iron fist. "Shut up. Such a young age, and you're already going astray. All you think about are frivolous things." The night rain cricket, beaten and hurt, knelt down with his head bowed. "You took her to a corner. Getting handsy. Anyone would think the worst, okay? But a virgin like the male lead wouldn't think that way." But the farce ended quickly. The male lead brought him here. He wanted to tell him about his future cultivation. Your spiritual root was dug out. Although I saved your life for now, your cultivation path is also severed. Without a spiritual root, you cannot cultivate. Mortals and cultivators are worlds apart. So much so that decades later, ordinary people are like ants, only to be trampled underfoot by cultivators. Yi Yuzhan knew all of this. He looked desolate at this moment, his eyes welling up with tears. In this cruel Huang Tianyu, ordinary people are more than just trampled underfoot. Without the will to fight, one can only lie down and wait for death. But he wasn't willing to give up. Just as he was about to surrender, the male lead suddenly patted him on the shoulder. I'm just giving you a friendly reminder. Don't lose heart. Since you're my student, lying down and waiting for death is not something you should be considering. How about I give you another spiritual root now? Initially, Yi Yuchan didn't understand what he meant, until the male lead explained, I don't currently have your original Xian Yin spiritual root here. Right now, I only have Yanghua, Baihan, and Qin Yu spiritual roots. You'll just have to make do. Upon hearing this, Yi Yuchan jumped right up, because the male lead's mentioned spiritual roots were all top-grade ones. After all, in his impression, the spiritual roots in this world are divided into 5 grades, and his own Xian Yin spiritual root is a superior grade spiritual root in the desolate heaven jade. Moreover, very few people can improve the grade of their spiritual root through cultivation. With the emergence of the 9 schools of high-grade spiritual roots, superior grade spiritual roots have become the target of everyone's grasping. Yi Yuchan couldn't believe that he would be willing to give such a good spiritual root to her. Looking at his loving face, Yi Yuchan became even more certain that this was impossible. The male lead must have some ulterior motive. Tell me, what do you want from me by giving me this spiritual root? If it's that kind of thing, I won't agree. After saying that, Yi Yuchan shyly hugged herself. Immediately after, a flick on the forehead landed on Yi Yuchan's head, to help her clear her head. I am your teacher. For your cultivation, isn't a welcome gift acceptable? After saying that, he took out 3 spirit roots, and these 3 spirit roots emitted different auras. Since Yi Yuchen didn't dare to choose, the male lead had to choose for him. His original Xian Yin spirit root belonged to the cold attribute. It clashes with his Yang fire spiritual root, and his Baihan spiritual root would be suppressed by the lingering cold air of Xian Yin. That leaves only the Qin Yu spiritual root. He analyzes the pros and cons for him, while simultaneously loosening the restrictions on the Qin Yu spiritual root, allowing him to absorb it better. Watching the male lead do all this for him, Yi Yuchan feels both surprised and worried. Think about it, from saving him to his clothes and then to giving him the spirit root. Could it be that he's an old lecher who likes to cultivate maids? During his contemplation, the male lead's spirit root suddenly appeared in his hand with a bang. Looking at the shape of this spirit root, it was a bit too much for Yi Yuchan to accept. After all, it's female. It's confusing to look at. The key male lead also wants him to eat this spiritual root. At this moment, Yi Yuchen looked at the spiritual root in his hand with a look of disgust. Such a strange spiritual root. How could he possibly eat it? Don't look at how weird it looks. You also know the benefits of the spiritual root. Thinking of its effects, Yi Yuchen was no longer as averse to it as before. He could barely tolerate it, just so he could cultivate sooner. Yi Yuchan swallowed Lin Zhen in one gulp. As for his expression while swallowing it, I won't describe it for you, just savor it yourselves. The male lead, standing aside, leered at him and asked, how is it? Isn't it a feeling of instant, utter relief? Looking at his own unserious master, Yi Yuchan was speechless. Then, the more he thought about it, the angrier he got. He kicked the male lead, but the latter easily caught his foot. Taking this opportunity, the male lead kept taking advantage of him. However, Yi Yuchan didn't pay attention to it at this moment, because he found that his cultivation had returned. The speed of recovery was unbelievable to him, so even if the male lead took further advantage of him, he didn't mind. Looking at Yi Yuchan's surprised expression, the male lead casually said, wait a few more days for you to consolidate it, and I'll take you back to your sect. But for him, this annoying sect, he didn't want to go back at all. Just after he broke free from the male lead's hold, he realized his legs were numb. He lost his balance, and lunged towards the male lead. Then, there was a thud. Yi Yuchan pinned the male lead against the ground. This pose is incredible, but he had been standing for too long. His feet were numb, and he couldn't move. He wanted the male lead to shift a bit, but who knew he did move? But it seemed like he moved in the wrong direction. He's definitely going to get a scolding from Yi Yu-chan later. But for the thick-skinned male lead, it's optional. After helping Yi Yu-chan fix her spiritual root, he was about to go back and perfectly fuse the spiritual roots on his body, but was stopped by the male lead. He said, "Don't you want revenge? To reclaim your original spiritual root?" Hearing this, Yi Yu-chan suddenly stopped. Then the entire sky gradually darkened. When he looked towards Yi Yu-chan's direction, the male lead discovered something incredible. At this moment, a terrifying aura was constantly emanating from her body. When she turned to look at him, her eyes were completely bloodshot, and the aura emanating from Yi Yu-chan felt familiar to the male lead. Before he could even think, Yi Yu-chan attacked, but the male lead easily dodged it with a back jump. This aura was related to the monster he fought many years ago. Looking at the force of the punch he landed on the wall, the male lead realized it was serious. As he turned around to continue attacking the male lead, his consciousness vaguely regained control of his body. She yelled at the male lead to run away, otherwise, he would kill you. After saying that, her eyes turned red again. Tears welled up in the corners of her eyes. Seeing this scene, the male lead was a little surprised. After all, to remind him, she had actually regained consciousness from the monster's control. It's a pity it only lasted for a few seconds. He was controlled by the monster again, and he attacked the male lead. His fists rained down on the male lead, but the male lead easily dodged this attack again. Taking advantage of Yi Yu-chan's unguarded moment, the male lead instantly appeared behind him. He struck the back of his neck with a hand chop, making her consciousness gradually blur. Eventually, she fell down. He easily caught her. He was still saying that in this situation, how could a teacher abandon her students and leave? That thing loves to evoke the host's negative emotions. This triggered Yi Yu-chan's rampage. But how did he end up inside Yi Yu-chan's body? The male lead recalled the battle hundreds of years ago. It was truly earth-shattering and soul-stirring. He was certain he had dealt with him. Why is he appearing before him again? For now, he can only suppress him within Yi Yu-chan's body. If he forcibly pulls him out, it will only shatter Yi Yu-chan's soul. It seems that after dealing with the current matter, he has to go to the sacrificial heaven prison. Just as he was pondering how to solve this problem, a small hand tugged at his clothes. He turned his head to see. It was his disciple, Lin Yuan. He then asked how he got there. Lin Yuan truthfully answered that his Lin Yuan force hadn't fully evolved. Basketball training. "I'm not playing well at all. I might as well not play. I was just walking around when I heard some commotion here, so I came to check it out. And I saw a sixth junior sister fainted in the male lead's arms. Worried, I asked him what happened. He just said that he almost lost control of his inner energy, but he's fine now. Xiao Yuan, can you help me take care of this girl?" After Lin Yuan agreed, the male lead handed Yi Yu-chan to him. But as soon as he took her, he discovered something incredible. Looking at the two peaks before him, he was astonished. After all, he himself hadn't seen such a spectacular sight. It was truly unbearable to watch. The male lead should go take care of his business first. Then he patted Mo Lin Yuan's head. He said he was going on a long journey to retrieve your sixth junior sister's belongings. Scene change. At a mountain peak. The surrounding area was shrouded in mist. Countless cultivators were coming towards it. It seems they are holding a recruitment ceremony. The male lead had just arrived at the assessment site. He overheard them discussing the upcoming recruitment conference. Turns out, this recruitment was a joint effort between the 3 Days Academy and the North Sky Valley to take on disciples. Upon hearing 3 Days Academy, the male lead's face immediately changed. He wondered if those old geezers had come. Time passed slowly. Soon, it was time for the assessment. The male lead saw him place his hand on the huge stone. As numbers appeared on the surface of the stone, he finally successfully obtained the qualification for the assessment with a rank 3 talent. When he walked into the heavenly monument valley before him, the male lead couldn't help but exclaim that he was back. The first assessment was to be held in the fighting arena. It was already packed with people. The assessment began on the field. When the male lead accidentally glanced at the people on the stage, he found that it wasn't those old guys from the 3 Days Academy, but people he had never seen before. It's fine if they didn't come. He wouldn't have to hold back later. Just as he was yawning, suddenly from behind, someone patted him on the back. He turned around and found a girl dressed as a boy approaching him. She said, "I see, brother, your clothes are fine and elegant, and you have a noble bearing. You must be from a prominent and influential family." After all, how could anyone see fine and elegant clothes and a noble bearing on the male lead with his scruffy look? And a noble bearing. But that's not the point. The point is, the girl also knows how to read faces. I see that your forehead is dark. You might encounter bloodshed today. These words made the male lead even more suspicious that the girl in front of him was a charlatan. After all, he even brought out the props for eating. Could this be fake? But the girl believed she had successfully deceived the male lead. She confidently said she would give him a 20% discount. Little did he know his fake beard was crooked. But the male lead didn't indulge him, taking a quick step forward. He said, "Little sister, if you're going to swindle people out of money, at least make sure your beard is glued on properly." The male lead's terrifying aura made the girl tremble with fear. She even felt the breath of death. In an instant, he grabbed his eating utensils and ran away, leaving only the male lead to clap his hands, saying he hasn't even grown a full beard yet and he's already trying to scam the old lady for money. Young people nowadays are too arrogant. Just as the male protagonist wanted to continue watching the match, something on the ground caught his attention. Looking at the coins on the ground, he had a sense of déjà vu. Scene change. The con artist girl, out of breath, stopped in front of someone who was wearing the same clothes as him. This man with a pink mohawk on his head scolds, "Tian-e, just give me some peace. Stop making a fuss." But he claimed that he was going to do something important. Then he reached into his clothes. He seemed to be taking something out. Immediately, a jade pendant appeared in his hand. He just kept flashing it. "I think I've met the prophesied child." Hearing this, the mechanism head's face immediately darkened. "Is it the prophesied person that Su the diviner talked about? Tianyi, don't you joke about this with Uncle Master. Because Tianyi cannot see his destiny, or perhaps he never had a life. In this world, only Tianyi possesses the eyes of the gods. He is the one who can glimpse the truth, the schemes of fate. He can see the destined path of anything in the world, even inanimate objects." Recalling the time before he left the sect, if you encounter someone the sect master's eyes cannot see through, as he instructed, remember to reason with them, because they are a VIP of the Blue Sky Palace, and will help us avoid a catastrophic disaster. The leader with the mechanical head immediately asked Tianyi if he had treated the person with courtesy. The girl swore that she had given him a 20% discount. Upon hearing this, a chill instantly ran down the leader's spine, but he was interrupted by the girl, because he discovered that the man fighting on the ring was the person he had just met. And on the ring, the male lead was already standing there. A great battle was about to begin. When the drum sounded, the referee announced that this match was a challenge by the male lead to the outer sect disciple, Liang Shi. The audience in the stands were buzzing with discussion, but the male lead didn't care, because the one he chose was the person who took Night Rain Cicada's spiritual route. Meanwhile, Liang looked at the male lead's carefree manner, thinking that he was very weak. She wanted to finish it quickly and go back to sleep. Then, with a burst of energy, she attacked the male lead head-on. She thought she could knock him down with one move, but what she didn't expect was, the male lead simply lifted his foot slightly. As he approached the male lead, he landed a precise blow to his abdomen in one swift move. With a simple kick, he sent him flying a great distance. He didn't stop until he crashed into the wall outside the arena. When he finally regained his senses, he realized he had underestimated his opponent. It seemed he had to get serious. But before he could wipe the blood from his mouth, he suddenly started coughing up blood again. Because the male lead didn't give him a chance to breathe, he stepped on him again. But the place where the male lead stepped was a little bouncy. "You lecher. Kill or maim, do as you please. Why humiliate me like this?" Seeing that the situation was not right, the male lead could only lift his own foot and say that it really wasn't intentional. "It's my fault for not predicting well," but that doesn't mean the male lead would let him off the hook. Immediately after, another chokehold slammed him to the ground. At this time, the male lead was choking his neck, and didn't immediately finish him off. Instead, he asked him where Yi Yu-chan's spiritual root was. Liang Shi was startled by these words. He asked the male lead how he knew. The disciples of Tianbei Valley in the audience watched their senior sister being mercilessly crushed by the male lead. They all cast strange glances at him, but the male lead ignored them. He leaned close to Liang Shi's ear and said, "Because Yi Yu-chan is still alive. After you left, I took him back. You might not believe it if I told you, but he was indeed saved by me." Upon learning that Yi Yu-chan was still alive, Master Liang seemed to find relief. He recalled his childhood memories with Yi Yu-chan, bit by bit. The girl who had been by his side since childhood, with high comprehension and rapid progress, was destined for greatness. But he was targeted by the powerful because he possessed a treasure. Under the coercion and inducement of the powerful and his master, he ultimately chose the sect that night. He severed his ties with Yi Yuchan with his own hands. When he learned that she was still alive, his master's tears flowed uncontrollably. Even so, the male lead still asked him where Yi Yuchan's spiritual root was. He had just finished speaking. A flying sword attacked from behind the male lead. Luckily, the male lead was agile. He dodged it with a turn of his head. "You audacious murderer! How dare you molest me in broad daylight?" The disciple of Tianbei Valley finished speaking. Before the male lead could react, they all rushed towards the male lead to attack him. But his words made them stop in their tracks. Physical contact is allowed during the match. It's not that uncommon. Besides, even if you go up against me, I'll fight like this. Instantly, they stopped. Thinking back to the scene of the male lead with the food just now, it made them think he was a homosexual. The male lead heard this and immediately burst into curses. "Go to hell with your homosexual nonsense." Seeing him curse like that, the agency head watching from the sidelines started to doubt whether he was truly the prophesied child. Even Tian-E also believed so. She even thought there was something wrong with her own eyes. It's time to put in some eye drops. Otherwise, eye strain will lead to making mistakes every day. When modern weapons arrive in the world of cultivating immortality, what will the experience be like? Let the male lead tell you. I can only say one word: it's too cool. Seeing the male lead suddenly take out a strange weapon, everyone present was completely baffled. I have absolutely no idea what that is. He just stood there blankly, waiting for the male lead to fire a loud shot, and blast the girl without any hesitation. The Mama Hong was successfully fired by the male lead. The disciples of Tian Bei Bu were blown away, screaming in agony. Then the male lead didn't intend to let them off. He launched a 360-degree attack on the outer disciples without a blind spot. Seeing this terrifying power, they were so scared that they ran away in a panic. Meanwhile, seeing this, the people from the 3 Days Academy were about to rush in to save them, but realized it was too late. When the smoke cleared, the male lead calmly walked out, approaching Tian Bei Gu, the old man. "Hey, if you can't win, don't pretend to be dead. Quickly tell me where Yi Yuchan Lin Zhen is. I'm very busy." But before the old man could answer, the male lead noticed a group of people approaching him. It turned out to be the people from 3 Days Academy who had wanted to help just now. "What? You're here to help this old geezer? Quite the close relationship, huh? Then how about you all get a 5-spice roast pork bombardment package as well? I guarantee you'll be satisfied." Those words scared them back several steps, but when the male lead pulled the trigger, he found that it fired a dud. Suddenly, the whole place was silent. The male lead stood there awkwardly, frozen. "Sorry about that. It's out of ammo. Give me some time to reload." But they wouldn't give him that time. They all rushed forward and beat him up. "You bunch of nobodies. Have the guts to fight me one-on-one. Dare you let me reload first?" Watching the male lead getting beaten helplessly by the crowd, Liang Si thought that perhaps he won before with some external help. Now he has no magical artifacts. And he's run into the 3 Days Academy. He'll be beaten to death. Then in the crowd, only a cry of help was heard. When the male lead slowly opened his eyes, he discovered something incredible. The grain was piled on top of him, trying to shield him from everyone's attacks. He even whispered in his ear, "Hurry and find a chance to escape. I couldn't protect Yu Chan before. This time, I must protect Yu Chan's lifesaver." Unfortunately, his actions were useless. He was lifted up. With a bang, he was thrown heavily to the ground. The male lead was already covered in wounds at this point. He lay on the ground, barely alive. He was even beaten to the point of spitting blood. "I underestimated him today. I surrender. Since I'm about to die anyway, can you tell me where Yi Yuchan's spiritual root actually is?" It sounded like his last words before death. When the arrogant little Gaga encountered the male lead with his superb acting skills, "Excuse me, we can only let him die, I guess. After all, the male lead has worked so hard. It's all to extract information from him." At this moment, he's looking down at the male lead with arrogance. "I took the suspicious spiritual route. Tianbei Valley wants to befriend the 3 Days Academy, so naturally, they had to get it for me. So you had Tianbei Gu dig up the suspense spirit root for you, even if it meant killing an innocent cultivator." In his eyes, Yi Yuchan was just a worthless life, just a stumbling block on his path to breaking through his bottleneck. Hearing this, the male lead was enraged to the extreme. Was it just a human life, after all? So this is the current state of your 3 Days Academy. What else? Human life is the least valuable thing to cultivators. So what if I dug up his spirit root? Aren't you just coming here to die by seeking revenge? This is a world of the strong preying on the weak. The Tianbei Valley disciples started to murmur after hearing his words. When he turned his head and glared at them fiercely, they immediately shut their mouths obediently. After all, before you start talking big, weigh your own weight first. Do you dare to be enemies with the 3 Days Academy? After saying that, he turned to look at the grain here. It was he who wanted to oppose the 3 Days Academy just now. Since that's the case, Gong Xingchen wanted to make an example of him. He stretched out a hand. A force pushed the grain towards his hand. At this moment, Gong Xingchen had one hand around the grain's neck, and the other hand placed on the location of its spiritual root. What followed was predictable. He brutally ripped out the grain's spiritual root. This is the consequence of opposing my 3 Days Academy. Looking at the fallen grain, the male lead felt that his current suffering had made amends for his past mistakes. As for this crazy woman named Gong Xingchen, the male lead didn't intend to let her off the hook. He picked up the male lead's rocket launcher, and toyed with it as if she knew how to use it. Then she said to the male lead, "Hand over your ammunition. Considering I'm in a good mood today, I'll let you die comfortably." She had just finished speaking. The male lead then tossed the storage ring in his hand to him. With this powerful magical artifact, as long as he offered it to those above, he was sure to receive a reward. However, the moment he got it, with a loud boom, a mushroom cloud rose from the ground. When the smoke cleared, only a vast expanse of rubble could be seen centered around Gong Xingchen. Gong Xingchen, standing still didn't know what had happened. He's not pretending anymore, the male lead's revealing his true self. Originally, he just wanted to put on a show, extract some information, and play with you all. He didn't initially intend to fight, but who knew he was so resilient? He didn't even die after a nuclear-level bomb. Now, the male lead has no choice but to take matters into his own hands. Although what's about to happen is a bit cruel, there's no other way. Only then did Gong Xingchen realize he had been tricked by the male lead. He was so angry that he almost transformed into a Super Saiyan. When the male lead gets angry, he'll let you know what survival of the fittest means, what good and evil mean. Faced with the male lead's intimidation, Gong Xingchen didn't care. He thought he had a protective piece left by the founder of the 3 Days Academy on him, so he started to taunt the male lead recklessly. He said that even if the 21st extreme came, they couldn't touch a single hair on him, let alone you, this ant. Since he was so arrogant, the male lead didn't need to hold back either. He directly attacked him. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of him, and within such a short time, Gong Xingchen didn't have time to react at all. The male lead's uppercut, like a skyrocket, sent him flying into the air. During the time he was flying through the air, the male lead didn't idle either. He leaped into the air. In an instant, he was behind Gong Xingchen. The male lead was already prepared for his next move. Energy continuously gathered in his hands. Another Kamehameha blasted him towards the ground. As the smoke cleared, a large crater appeared where the ground had been hit by the energy wave. Gong Xingchen, inside the crater, trembled as he held on to the wall. Until now, he still couldn't believe the fact that he was beaten. He's not a psychic. How could his spiritual realm fail? Could it be that his spiritual realm is broken? After ruling out all other possibilities, he believed that his spiritual realm must be broken. Then he took out his flying vehicle and planned to return to his sect. He originally planned to fix his spiritual realm before seeking trouble with the male lead again. But before he could fly up, a hand pressed against the back of his head. It turned out that the male lead had appeared at some point behind him, saying, "Did I say you could leave?" Then, another earth-shattering punch sent him crashing to the ground. In the dust, one could vaguely see the male lead pressing down on Gong Xingchen. Even though he was completely helpless, Gong Xingchen was still yelling, "If you don't want me to be annihilated, die a painful death. Just let me go." Regarding his threat, the male lead didn't pay any attention. Without saying a word, he directly inserted his hand towards the location of the spiritual root. Seeing that his spiritual root couldn't be saved, he started making threats again. "You wretch, I will make the Gong family and the 3 Days Academy tear you to pieces." The male lead still ignored him. He simply forcefully snatched back the spirit root that Yi Yu was holding. Looking at the spirit root in his hand, the male lead spoke disdainfully, "Public school, 3 Days Academy, you sent them to hunt me down. That's truly the funniest joke I've heard this year." Then, grabbing his hand that held the spirit sword, he said, "The spirit sword in your hand was given by me to those old fellows to let them live. After finishing, he placed his hand on Gong Xingchen's head. Only then did he start begging for mercy. Unfortunately, it was too late. Several electric currents were seen flowing from his brain to his entire body. The pain made him scream repeatedly. Finally, the male lead also secretly told him a secret. That is, the 3 Days Academy was actually opened by him. Gong Xingchen was terrified upon learning this news. Towards his enemies, he shows no mercy at all. Despite having a powerful background, he still paid no attention, and took back the Lin Zhen from Yi and Chan. But faced with his reformed mentor, he ultimately chose to forgive him. The reason why he didn't save him from Gong Xingchen's hands, it's because he caused Yi Yuchuan unbearable pain that night. But the male lead still chose to treat him. After all, he had just risked his life to shield him from those punches and kicks. After healing him, the male lead said to him, "From today onwards, you and Yi Yuchuan are quits." After saying that, the male lead turned to leave, but was suddenly grabbed by Liang Shi. "Could you help me deliver a message to Yi Yuchuan?" he said. And the male lead didn't refuse this request. After all, this message could potentially help Yi Yuchuan emerge from her shadow. After he finished speaking, with a whoosh, the male lead vanished without a trace. The rooster-comb-haired guy who had watched the entire fight could now be certain. The male lead is the one he's looking for. For centuries, only the martial emperor and the literary emperor among the 3 celestial domains have been able to break through to true immortal. Half-immortals are few and far between. Aside from the 21 extremes, there are only Qi Mengshu and our Blue Firmament Palace's Su, the half-immortal. There are quite a few with cultivation below half-immortal. But over these years, almost no one can advance to the level of a demi-immortal anymore. Now, a star who surpasses demi-immortals suddenly appears. He's also the prophesied child. It seems like things are about to change drastically. Scene change. The male lead has returned to his base camp. When he reached his room, he found the light still on inside. He thought someone was waiting for him, but as he was about to open the door, he heard indescribable sounds coming from inside. To find out what was going on, he poked a small hole in the door. When he looked inside, the sight made his pupils dilate. He saw Lin Yuan rubbing Yi Yuchan's back. This scene is truly beautiful, like a painting. The male lead outside was so captivated that his nose started bleeding. His fall caught Lin Yuan's attention. When they opened the door, they found the male lead already lying on the ground. Immediately, Lin Yuan rushed into the male lead's arms. "Teacher, you're back so soon. Yuer has been very well behaved today." Not only did she supervise the 6th junior sister's medicinal bath, but she also massaged him to dredge his meridians. Watching him act coquettishly, the male lead pinched his face and said, "Yuer, you're really reliable as a senior sister. Go to rest early. Tomorrow, Master will give you a new musical score. It's Wendy's." Lin Yuan was also very obedient to the male lead. He waited for him to finish. Then he waved goodbye to the male lead. But Yi Yuchan was different. She questioned the male lead relentlessly. "Where did you go? So secretive. And you even had seen your sister and the others hide it from me?" The male lead didn't explain much either. He directly took out the Xian Yin spiritual root he had retrieved. The moment she saw the Xian Yin spiritual root, Yi Yuchan's face showed an expression of disbelief. She hadn't expected that he would be willing to break with those powers for her. Then, the male lead took her hand. He handed the Xian Yin spiritual root to her. At this moment, Yi Yuchan's impression of the male lead had undergone a subtle change. Faced with his beautiful disciple's initiative to throw herself at him, the male lead resolutely pushed her away. What on earth is going on? This has to go back to when the male lead gave the Xianin spiritual root to Yi Yuchan. At that time, the male lead not only returned the Xianin spiritual root to him, but also told Yi Yuchan that someone asked him to deliver a message to him. It was Liang Shi expressing his guilt. "It's my senior sister who's sorry to him." Hearing this, Yi Yuchan clenched her fists and trembled. "I don't care what happens to your senior sister in the future, but I only hope that you can break free from hatred. You are my disciple. I believe you can do it." But the male lead just finished saying. A demonic aura emanated from Yi Yuchan's body. At this moment, he was blinded by hatred again. He seemed to be controlled by a demonic creature. And the demonic creature kept suggesting to him in Yi Yuchan's mind to give his body to it. As Yi Yuchan's eyes slowly turned red, the demonic creature successfully regained control once more. Following that, he fell into the male lead's arms, saying that, "I promise you. So what's the reward?" While speaking, he stroked parts of the male protagonist's body with his hand. Then, taking advantage of the male protagonist's distraction, He opened his mouth wide and lunged at his neck. Unfortunately, he did not succeed. Instead, he was ruthlessly pushed away by the male protagonist, who also took the opportunity to deal with the monster inside Yi Yu-chan, blasted him out, seized the opportunity to seal him inside the formation. The monster was furious upon realizing he'd been tricked, but it was already too late. Afterward, the protagonist even mocked him for not improving after hundreds of years. Who can he blame for that? As the formation activated, he was slowly sucked in bit by bit. It was only then that he began to beg for mercy. Unfortunately, the protagonist ignored him. Seeing that he was about to be completely sealed within the formation, he flew into a helpless rage. He made some threats, but ultimately couldn't escape being sealed. However, the protagonist can't eliminate him yet. Otherwise, it would harm Yi Yu-chan's foundation. So the male lead can only temporarily seal him within Yi Yu-chan. He will eliminate him when the time is right. The scene shifts. Yi Yu-chan groggily wakes up from his dream, but as soon as he wakes up, he realizes his whole body is sore. It's as if he has been beaten. The male lead explains that he fell at the door earlier, but Yi Yu-chan doesn't believe his nonsense at all. But thinking that he would risk offending those powerful factions for her, he didn't continue asking further, saying something about the male lead showing Yi Yu-chan a big treasure. That's way too shocking, right? Even Yi Yu-chan found it hard to accept after hearing it. But who would have known the next day, the male lead took her to the dance studio. The key point was that his disciples were all on break at the time. It was just the two of them left. Thinking of this, Yi Yu-chan immediately felt shy. After all, he had been training one-on-one with the male lead all day today. When asked about what the male lead referred to as little treasure last night, the male lead directly told him it was a cultivation technique. He also told him to abandon the techniques he had practiced before. The male lead promised to give him a better one, but after so many years of hard work on his techniques, how could he just abandon them? This made Yi Yu-chan a bit unwilling. Since that's the case, the male lead made a bet with him. He told him to punch the post in front of them, with his current technique. If the post breaks, he'll listen to him. If it doesn't, he'll have to listen to the male lead. Then Yi Yu-chan got to work right away. He just closed his eyes to rest, focused all his strength into his fist. The next second, he unleashed an invincible mountain-crushing punch on the post in front of him. Afterwards, he didn't even look at the result. Instead, he confidently boasted, "My mountain-crushing punch isn't bad, right?" But what he got in return was the protagonist's merciless laughter. "Are you sure that's called a mountain-crushing punch? I think we should just call it a turtle punch. The size and shape are quite similar. A flurry of actions like a fierce tiger. But look at the score, 0-5. I'm talking about you, aren't I?" Under the protagonist's relentless mocking, Yi Yu-chan started to doubt himself. He even started to wonder if the protagonist had tampered with the table. Then the protagonist explained that the table was made of special wood. Normal attacks are definitely ineffective. Hearing this, Yi Yu-chan started to protest, but the protagonist didn't give him a chance. Then, the protagonist pointed at the mountain opposite, saying, "See that? Those mountains are piled high with Xuanzi that your senior brothers and sisters defeated." Looking at the countless Xuanzi on the mountain, those were merely their achievements from the Xian sect days. Hearing the male lead's words, Yi Yu-chan finally realized that she was truly useless. But don't be discouraged. Once you switch to a new technique, you'll catch up to them. But Yi Yu-chan still felt downhearted. After all, a top-tier level 6 technique isn't something easy to come by. Techniques and spiritual weapons have 7 ranks, and they are further divided into low, middle, and high levels. It's not that easy to find. High-grade techniques are extremely rare, let alone possessing one. Just catching a glimpse would be worth a lifetime. And now, his technique is at least top-tier, level 6. Yet he still thinks his worthless technique is superior. So, the protagonist throws out a bunch of junk from his spatial ring, saying, "I really don't have much top-grade stuff, but there are quite a few heavenly treasures. These cluttered items have been sitting here for a while. It's really quite bothersome." But before the male lead could finish speaking, Yi Yu-chan was already lying among the pile of techniques. Indeed, the speed at which she turns against him is remarkable. She was just sulking and disdaining the male lead. Now she feels like her life has reached its peak. Look at him, acting like he's never seen the world. The protagonist thought it would be better to personally help Yi Yu-chan find the technique most suited to his spiritual root. Then, he picked up a green scroll. He said, "This Qianren technique is perfect for your jade spirit root." Excitedly, he snatched the technique from the protagonist's hands. "This is way too generous. Am I really not dreaming?" Any random one is already a heaven-grade level 6 technique. Looking at the contents inside, even Yi Yu-chan herself didn't expect that in her lifetime, she would own a tier 6 heavenly technique. Watching Yi Yu-chan giggling with the technique in her arms, the male lead was speechless. Wipe the drool from your mouth. We need to go find the next item. The scene shifts. They arrived at a seemingly very dilapidated house. Even the doorway was covered in cobwebs. The night rain cicadas were chirping. Perhaps it truly hides dragons and crouching tigers. There might be a different world inside. Seeing that there was no response to his knocking, the male lead had no choice but to shout loudly for someone to open the door, while increasing the force of his knocking. In the end, through the protagonist's relentless efforts, the door was opened. Out walked a seemingly ordinary blacksmith. And he seemed to recognize the protagonist. Upon the protagonist's arrival, he didn't show him a friendly face, because he knew that every time the protagonist came to him, it's all to exploit his own disciple. Did he just take in a Yi Yu-chan? So the male lead came to him again. As soon as he entered the room, it was filled with all kinds of worn-out weapons. At first, Yi Yu-chan thought these worn-out items were definitely a facade. He couldn't be deceived by appearances. But no matter how he looked at it, it didn't seem like a place that could produce high-level weapons. Meanwhile, the male lead is negotiating the price with the blacksmith. At first, the male lead didn't wait for him to make a request, and said, I understand. 2 copies, right? But when the blacksmith heard there were only 2 copies, he immediately pushed the male lead away and said, You old bastard, stop pretending. What I want is 20 copies. Hearing his outrageous demand, the male lead was shocked. Why don't you just rob me for 20 portions? Did you see the name of our abandoned workshop? Take it or leave it, or get lost. Faced with his shameless behavior, the male lead nervously raised 5 fingers. Do you know how hard it is for me to gather materials? 5 servings is the maximum. The next scene is easy to imagine. They bargained like ordinary people at a market. While they were arguing incessantly, Yi and Zen were squatting nearby, accidentally breaking a dagger. In the end, they reached a consensus on 10 servings. Clearly, the male lead looked completely drained. Immediately after, the male lead took out 10 portions of pickled cabbage and gave them to him. Seeing this scene, Yi Yu-chan was somewhat speechless. After all that effort, they actually argued for so long over instant noodles. At this moment, the blacksmith suddenly looked at him, startling him into a shiver. This girl is somewhat capable, able to make old Wong bleed so much. He's still the first one. After they finally agreed on the weapon details, the blacksmith happily saw off the main character and his group. But the main character was furious. Turns out their brotherly bond was as fragile as plastic, worth nothing in front of a bowl of pickled noodles. Can you believe it? This little blacksmith turned out to be the genius Duansheng. Not only that, he also likes to eat pickled mustard greens. You all know. After the main character and the others left, he realized that the dagger and hammer he forged were destroyed. He was so furious. And this scene was overheard by Mechanism Head and his group. They started to doubt if the person inside was really Duansheng. After all, the house is shabby. The degree of decay and his character are somewhat questionable. Perhaps a sage of Duansheng's caliber is transcendent. A fighter who regards money as worthless can also become a sage. Just as they were discussing this, the front door suddenly opened. The person inside walked out. At this moment, he was eating pickled mustard greens, while asking, Who are you people? What are you doing standing at my door? Seeing someone come out, Jiguantu immediately clasped his hands in greeting. Master Duan, we have important business to discuss with you. But regarding their request, Duansheng didn't care. He said if they wanted ready-made goods, they could go inside and pick. If they wanted something custom-made, they could check the prices listed. Looking at the clearly marked custom prices, it was simply outrageous. It made them hesitate. Seeing they didn't respond, Duansheng turned to head back inside. Ziguantu hurriedly stopped him. Please wait, sir. I am Manhwa, a disciple of Master Lan Yutian. I earnestly plead for your help as it is urgent. Upon hearing his introduction, Duansheng suddenly realized. Ah, Master Lan Yutian. I remember, I even held you when you were a child. Is your Lanyu heavenly craft in trouble? Tell me, what do you want me to fix? After all, I promised Miss Lanyu that I'd look after you. Let him finish talking. The mechanized leader took out a glowing magic orb and said this is what he'd like your help to repair. This artifact has a cracked surface. It turns out it's the sole manifestation of Lanyu heavenly soldiers. One of the 21 ultimate artifacts. How could it be damaged? The spiritual manifestation is about to shatter. Faced with his question, even his disciples don't know the exact reason. They can only beg Duan Xing to help fix it. Seeing the spiritual manifestation in such a dire state, Duan Xing seems to realize the world is about to change. And there's no news from the protagonist, that old rascal. The scene shifts. On a certain street, people come and go. The male lead discovers something incredible. He actually sees Jiang Yuetian fighting with someone. As he gets closer, he finds out he's actually fighting someone from the city lord's mansion. He even says, "I'll make you listen to me play the flute. Are you still daring enough to let me play the flute?" The beaten-up little guy immediately begged for mercy. Meanwhile, the male lead was completely confused. He had no idea what was going on. No way, the male lead's apprentice actually went to perform for money. Who knew he looked so much like a girl that others mistook him for one? They forced him to perform playing the flute. What shocking news. Yi Yuchan seems a bit taken aback. The male lead knows Jiang Yuetian's personality inside out. It's definitely because of his drug addiction. He lost all his money. That's why he's performing. This part of the story, Jiang Yuetian didn't deny it himself. However, the male lead didn't blame him. I said, since I'm in a good mood today, I'll play a couple of rounds with him, thinking I could win back the money Jiang Yuetian lost. Overhearing their conversation, Yi Yuchan seems to have discovered a huge secret. Didn't expect brother Jiang to have this side to him, and they weren't idle either. Hurriedly heading to the casino, Yi Yuzhan, who was behind, secretly noted this down. However, his action was just noticed by the male lead. When the male lead asked him what he was doing, Yi Yuzhan panicked immediately. He quickly hid the notebook in his hand. He said it was nothing. I was just noting down the people who bullied brother Jiang. However, what he recorded was about the exceptional big shots around him. It indicates that the male lead is a perverted old man, deep and unfathomable. Ling Yuan is a soft and cute lowly, an invisible black-hearted person, and Jiang Yuetian is a cross-dressing master, extremely powerful. I'm not familiar with the other three. The scene shifts. They arrived at the luxurious casino. Just standing at the entrance made them nervous. And inside, it was even more crowded. Every table was packed with people. As soon as the male lead and his group entered the casino, a scantily dressed girl came over to greet them, saying, "Oh, our big spender is here." The guys nearby also started to cheer. "So, you brought some friends to play today, why not start with the beginner level? That way, even if you lose, you won't lose everything." Hearing that, Jiang Yuetian, with his hot temper, couldn't take it. He was about to step forward and beat them up, but the male lead stopped him. "Don't rush. Watch how I do it." Then the male lead arrogantly said to them, "When it comes to gambling, I'm really not afraid of anyone. What's the point of beginner's level? If we're playing, let's play big." At first, the scantily clad girl examined the male lead. Then she leaned on him and said, "You're quite bold, little brother. I just don't know how big you want to play." For the main guy, of course, the bigger, the better. And hearing this, he started rubbing himself against the main guy. In the end, they decided to go with the most thrilling option, building a park. Seeing the main guy, totally dazed by his charm, this made Ye Zhen absolutely furious. They immediately came to the gambling table in the garden. After they sat down, the onlookers all thought the male lead would definitely lose. Even Jiang Yuetian thought so too. To help the male lead quickly familiarize himself with the rules, Shang Yuetian planned to demonstrate first. This way, the male lead could avoid a misstep, although he always loses when he gambles. But this spirit of self-sacrifice is really quite foolish. This Jian Yuan game requires the dealer to input 0 vitality first. Players place their chips on the corresponding numbers. Then, 5 short swords are dropped. This time, Jiang Yuetian directly bet all 100 gold coins on number 7. If the sword doesn't fall into the hole of the chosen number, then it's a loss. As a gambling addict, Jiang Yuetian didn't expect. In order to cover it up, he actually bet all 100 gold coins at once. For someone who always loses when gambling, if nothing unexpected happens this time, it's another guaranteed loss. But after Yi Yuchan's careful thinking, he came up with a perfect cover. This guaranteed loss doesn't need Jiang Yuetian to cover it up at all. The key point is, he even used 100 gold coins at once to cover up this calligraphy. In Jiang Yuetian's eyes, losing money has become an everyday occurrence for him. But the money he lost all belongs to Ye Yuchan. The more he thinks about it, the angrier he gets. Fortunately, the protagonist stepped in to stop him. Otherwise, he would have gone into berserk mode again. During their argument, the girl opposite is getting a bit impatient. She asks, have you all come to an agreement? Are you still going to play? It was precisely his action that made the male lead notice the faint sword shadow on his chest. Now the male lead understands everything. It turns out he has been cheating throughout the entire game. But knowing this, the protagonist still chooses to continue gambling. He even directly bets 5,000 gold coins. All of it on zero. This time, the protagonist wants him to lose everything. Faced with such a bold move from the protagonist, the girl feels a bit impressed. But the onlookers think the protagonist is just a fool wasting money. Just as he is about to start, he suddenly let out a shy little cry. This scene made everyone around blush deeply. I didn't expect the male lead to sneak attack the girl's weapon. Who wouldn't be confused after seeing this? Not only that, the male lead also squeezed it, calmly saying, I'm just curious. Is this really natural? These inappropriate scenes and dialogue for children made Jiang Yuetian cover Yi Yuchan's ears directly, telling him to calm down. The male lead's strange behavior made the girl suspicious. Could it be that he's discovered something? But she's hidden it so well. When she looks at the male lead, he realized he was still savoring the feeling from before. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. Afterwards, he stopped thinking about it. He directly threw out 5 daggers and began. Meanwhile, the protagonist had been waiting for a long time, but the disciples behind him were extremely nervous. As unbelievable shouts came from the casino, they were completely caught off guard. This time, the male lead actually won. At this moment, Jiang Yuetian and Yi Yuchan are jumping with joy. Meanwhile, the onlookers are praising the male lead enthusiastically. Where there's a winner, there's also a loser. And the losing side this time is the casino. Looking at the girl's unpleasant expression, the male lead then said, have you realized you can't control the flying sword? At that moment, the girl finally understood. Just now, the male lead intentionally touched her chest. No matter how magnificent Zyagaga's moves were, they were nothing in front of the male lead. He effortlessly broke free from the restraints. Even the wandering souls fled at the sight of the male lead. As for her enemy, the protagonist showed no mercy. Not only were all his limbs broken, but the execution was swift and precise. To this day, the old man still doesn't understand when the protagonist got out. And he came out completely unscathed. As for the protagonist, this perfect prey, at first, he thought he was incredibly lucky. But later, he started to go mad. After all, he'd been stuck in the infant stage for so many years. He finally found a suitable resource to break through. In his view, this was simply a gift from the heavens. Just as he was laughing maniacally, suddenly, with a whoosh, he completely disappeared from under the protagonist's feet. This was something the protagonist never expected. After all, teleportation artifacts are rare in this world. Then a scream suddenly came from behind the male lead. When he turned around to look, he found that all the little gagas who had been surrounding him were being sucked into the ceiling. The screams echoed one after another. In the end, all the little gagas were gathered together by the old man, and he was continuously absorbing their spiritual power from above. In an instant, the limbs that had just been broken by the male lead were immediately restored to the original state. Suck these low-level nutrients dry. It is the honor of you low-tier cultivators. Once I regain my strength, I'll capture that kid and call. This way, I can achieve a breakthrough in one go. This is because he fully agrees with this idea. The male lead is very supportive of it. It's a pity he encountered the male lead, someone as ethereal as I am. How could I be refined by something filthy like the Huan technique? It just so happens that I know a graceful and stylish method. Let me demonstrate it on you first. After you personally experience it, then you can try to refine me. Suddenly, a blue phantom appeared under the old man's feet. Even he was somewhat at a loss. Suddenly, the phantom opened its gaping maw. It swallowed the old man whole. It was unclear how much time had passed. The old man suddenly opened his eyes. He found himself in an unfamiliar place. His limbs and head were bound tightly. The male protagonist was sitting in front of him, quietly waiting for his awakening. Seeing the old man had woken up, the male lead just curled his finger, and he came right in front of him. The male lead seemed like the king ruling this place. Comfortable here with me? You're on the brink of death, and still sleeping so soundly. Does being tied up with chains make you feel comfortable? Facing the protagonist's mockery, the old man doesn't seem to realize his situation yet. What do you want to do to me, old man? Do you know who I work for? Every villain says this before they die, and the protagonist plays along. So, tell me, who do you work for? You know the famous Thunder sect, right? Even if you've heard of it, you still don't understand. Before the Linza era, the Thunder sect was incredibly proud of Emperor Wen. You should be able to understand that. As soon as he heard the term Emperor One, the male lead seemed to take an interest. He then stood up and said, "Are you talking about the one who can move heaven and earth? The suave, talented, and unparalleled master, Wendy." In order to expose the casino girls cheating, the male lead boldly goes for the girls' assets. And he actually succeeded. What happens next in the game is obvious. With just a small trick, the male lead wins the round. Up until now, the girl realizes her secret has been tampered with by the male lead. But now that I've realized it, it's already too late. The key point is that the male lead will expose that these 5 flying swords are his life-bound magic tools, sacrificed with his blood. Everything is under his control. Then the male lead picked up the flying sword. He lifted the girl's chin. He asked her straightforwardly if what I said just now was right. But how could he admit it? If this were to be said out loud, the boss behind the scenes won't let him go, seeing that he still hasn't confessed. The male lead had no choice but to say, "Let's play another round. Let's see if I bankrupt your casino first. Or if you expose yourself first." Upon hearing this, the girl suddenly surged with power, releasing a strong aura. Faced with his actions, the onlookers immediately hid behind the male lead. They thought he was going to make a big move, but unexpectedly, with a bang, he disappeared. Only 2 unidentified objects remained. It turned out he just shrank in size, and escaped through the crowd. Regarding this matter, he has to hurry back to report to the boss behind the scenes. The scene changes. At this moment, he's covered in blood, and looks like he's on the verge of death. In a courtyard somewhere, he's being carried out by 2 people. Someone steps forward to report that young Master Chen is visiting. The owner of this courtyard is none other than the casino kingpin, Zhong Tianying. As for why young Master Chen is here to visit him, it's probably because he got into trouble with someone again. When young Master Chen stood before him, this was the person who had been beaten up by Jiang Yuetian before. "I didn't expect him to be the young master of the city lord's residence." Seeing him, Zhong Tianying asked, "What brings you to me?" He then took the painting from his younger brother's hands. Juan opened the scroll in front of Zhong Tianying. He said, "I got tricked by that little girl today. Brother Zhong, you have a wide network. Help me find her. I'm going to make her pay for this." This person was indeed causing trouble at Zhong Tianying's casino. Angry, he ordered his men to invite 3 enforcers. The scene shifted. On a rural road somewhere, the male lead was suddenly blocked by someone. Unexpectedly, they had just let that girl from the casino go, and now they're facing another roadblock. "Since you're sincerely asking, little Gagaga, I'll mercifully tell you. I am the mighty bull demon Pill, one of the 7 powerhouses of the Kaiyuan era, and the 3 of us here are assassins sent by the Zhongtian Eagle faction." Before the male lead could speak, the trio quickly chose their targets. Without another word, they charged at the male lead and his group. Meanwhile, Nyo Mo1 saw Jiang Lai Tian in a red outfit, and frantically charged towards him. After all, he was a mad bull, sensitive to the color red. Fortunately, Jiang Yu Tian was quite agile. With a leap, he cried out and dodged away. For the rampaging bull demon king, the tree in front of him was like paper. It broke with a single hit. His strength is impressive, but unfortunately, his mind isn't very sharp. He didn't even realize his own attack was dodged. He still thought Jiang Yuetian had been knocked away. Little did he know that Jiang Yuetian had already jumped onto the tree, watching him from above, amused. He thought he had met someone he could toy with, but it turned out to be someone a bit slow-witted. When he turned around to look behind him, he found Yi Yuchan being chased by Qiu Qinlian. Seeing that Yi Yuchan was in trouble, he thought about stepping in to help him, but immediately he denied this idea. "Let the teachers handle the hero saving the beauty. Otherwise, I might end up being a third wheel." On the male lead side, he watched as Yi Yuchan was being chased. He didn't take action right away. Instead, he was thinking about how long Yi Yuchan could hold on. After all, it's rare to have someone come to practice on their own, but he waited in place for a long time. No little brat came to trouble him. Just when he thought the fighting was all about knights, a figure appeared above his head. At that moment, the birdman in the air looked at the motionless protagonist, and couldn't help but exclaim about the weakling who didn't even know to run. Forget it, taking people's money, solving others' problems. Then, a metal claw strikes towards the protagonist. It grabs the protagonist's shoulder, and lifts him into the air. Seeing this scene, Yi Yuchan hurriedly calls for her teacher, but it's no use. She even ends up putting herself in danger, because in this brief moment, Qiu Qianlian caught up to him. Facing his step-by-step approach, Yi Yuchan felt an unprecedented sense of fear. As his iron chain swung toward him, all Yi Yuchan could do was try his best to block the strike. Will he be able to block it successfully? Let's wait and see. When his own disciple is in danger, the master actually just stands there and watches. In the end, he even gets his shoulder grabbed by the bird man, taking him into the sky. Now Yi Yuchan can only rely on himself to deal with the little trouble at hand. But the two of them are on completely different levels. So much so that in Qiu Qilian's first attack, he is able to dodge it. But next time, he wasn't so lucky. Then, Qiu Qianlian swung the iron chain in his hand. Before Yi Yuchan could react, his legs were already tied up by him. With just a hard pull, Yi Yuchan was yanked backward. With a thud, he fell heavily to the ground. Looking at Yi Yuchan in front of him, Qiu Qianlian couldn't help but lick the corner of his mouth. After all, he had a bit of a perverted posture. He must like this kind of thing. Then, without saying a word, Qiu Qianlian lifted the iron chain and swung it at Yi Yuchan. Unless something unexpected happened, Yi Yuchan would definitely take the hit. And it landed right between Yi Yuchan's chest. Making you not obey, huh? This little punishment is just an appetizer. The more you struggle, the tighter my chains will get. Facing this old pervert, Yi Yuchan had no way to deal with him. And after his sword broke and he bled, he seemed even crazier. Now there's only one chance left to survive. And that is to use seduction. Yi Yuchan slowly adjusted her maid dress. She shyly said, "Let's talk nicely. Why resort to violence?" As soon as she said this, Qiu Qianlian's nostrils flared with anger. Her blood was boiling. It was precisely because he was blinded by lust that Yi Yuchan seized the opportunity. With a brutal kick to his crotch, making him scream in agony. Then followed it up with a kick to his face. Only then could Yi Yuchan ease the hatred in her heart. With a simple kick, she sent Qiu Qianlian flying hundreds of meters away. The pain of the low blow left Qiu Qianlian writhing on the ground. After calming down a bit, he pointed at Yi Yuchan and spat out harsh words. "You damn bitch. Daring to mess with me. You're dead for sure. I'm going to drain your blood, and turn you into a doll. Beat you every day." Facing his threats, Yi Yuchan is not worried at all. She even boldly claims that if you have the ability, then chase me. Catch me and you can do whatever you want. Since Yi Yuchan dares to make such a statement, it shows that she is very confident in her ability to escape. It is precisely because of Yi Yuchan's words that they once again began the chase. And on the male lead side, he and Qi Mengshu were drinking tea and playing chess somewhere. He didn't seem to care at all about Yi Yuchan being chased. After all, the protagonist came to find Qi Mengshu this time. Definitely to see if he could get some help for Yi Yuchan. Then, the protagonist started to probe him, saying, "My apprentice is good in every way, except her constitution is a bit weak." Without even thinking, Qi Mengshu blurted out, "That's no big deal. Just find a place to let. He's refining his body through training." Immediately, the protagonist followed up, "So, where do you think the best place for body refinement is?" "That would obviously be my Qimeng tree." But he suddenly stopped halfway through. He seemed to realize something was off. But it was already too late. At this moment, the protagonist was smiling at him. He then grabbed his hand and forced a toast. "Brother, I'm counting on you for this." To ensure his disciple gets the best tempering environment, the male lead had no choice but to gradually lead Qi Mengshu into his own trap. In the end, he lived up to expectations. He successfully tricked her into a chance at heartbreak. Upon realizing she had been deceived, Qi Mengshu's expression immediately turned sour. "If I had known, I would have hidden as soon as I smelled it. Why did I come here to reminisce? I clearly walked right into this, asking for trouble." The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. In the end, he vented all his frustration on the birdman hanging there. Faced with the scolding from this deity, the birdman dared not retort. He could only continue to flap his wings with all his might. Looking over at Yi Yuchan. At this moment, he was running while dodging Qiu Qianlia's attacks. After a long period of wear and tear, Yi Yuchan realized that this couldn't go on. She was about to exhaust her recently recovered Lingyuan power. Just when she was at a loss, a voice appeared in her mind. "What are you afraid of?" Another chain strike came. It directly broke the tree. Yi Yuchan also fell from the tree. But the voice she just heard was clearly the male lead's. She looked up. She saw the male lead greeting her from midair. When they landed, a barrier wrapped around them. In an instant, Qiu Qianlian realized the other person was gone. Looking at the unscathed male lead, Yi Yuchan started to have doubts. "How did you deal with that birdman so quickly?" Actually, the male lead never left. He just sent a doppelganger over. This doppelganger was only for transmitting messages. I can only maintain the barrier ball for 10 minutes. I'll keep it short. The first time I faced you, he luckily won a round. But now he's being completely overwhelmed. Have you thought about why? Panicking and losing focus. When the opponent goes crazy, you're full of flaws. Of course, you're just asking for a beating. After hearing the male lead's analysis, Yi Yu-chan also realized that she was indeed too anxious just now. The situation on your side is unclear. I'm worried but not yet. Wait until he finishes speaking. The male lead hugged her shoulders. You need to protect yourself first. To have a chance to help me. Then he slowly helped Knight Rain up, and told him that the old pervert across relies mainly on his chains for damage. As long as you stay calm, I'm sure you can find his weakness. Then he patted him on the shoulder. The protagonist dissolved into the air. When Qiu Qianlian was at his wit's end, a voice called out to him. He turned to look behind him, and found that Yi Yu-chan had unknowingly appeared in front of him again. Before he could react, Yi Yu-chan started circling around him repeatedly, as his speed increased. After images even appeared, Qiu Qianlai was completely dizzy. He had no idea which was real and which was fake. The more he looked, the more confused he became. He fell into a state of unconsciousness. Seeing the opportunity right, Yi Yu-chan immediately stepped in front of him. He struck Qiu Qianlai hard on the chin. Some of his teeth were knocked out by Yi Yu-chan. The immense power directly sent him flying tens of thousands of miles away. In order for Yi Yu-chan to go for the trial, without him discovering it, the male protagonist resorted to both coaxing and deceiving. Only then did he successfully trick him into Qi Mengshu's territory. As for why he did this, that has to start from when Yi Yu-chan defeated Qiu Qinlian. He originally thought it was over. Just when he could finally rest, the male lead suddenly sent him a message, saying, "You're not winning yet, hurry up and start running." At first, Yi Yu-chan was confused, since he had clearly struck him with a palm. So why did he still need to run? Then the male lead explained, "Your strike wasn't strong enough. He's up again now. There's a forest ahead. Go hide there first. I'll come for you." Then Yi Yu-chan arrived at a dense forest. Without a second thought, he ran straight in. However, he didn't notice the sign above saying, "Cave Ruins 7 and below are off limits." The scene shifts. At this moment, Jiang Yuetian found Qiu Qianlian, who had been defeated by Yi Yu-chan. However, he did not find the male lead and Yi Yu-chan. But thinking about Yi Yu-chan being with the male lead, he figured there shouldn't be any problems. Then he turned and left. He was thinking about going back to count the money he made at the casino today. The scene shifts. Arriving at Yuntian Academy. Inside, the protagonist's disciples are busy with their own tasks. Bang! The door was suddenly kicked open by a group of ruffians. The leader of the ruffians shouted loudly, "Listen up, everyone inside. You are surrounded. Do not resist in vain. Put down your weapons immediately. Confess for leniency. Resist for severity." But what he said is no threat at all to the male lead's disciples. Seeing this situation, little Gaga starts to get arrogant. "My people have surrounded you. You should be panicking and huddling together now. They should be trembling." The next second, the four of them were glaring fiercely at little Gaga. Under their terrifying pressure, little Gagas were trembling. Their tone immediately softened. "Big brothers and sisters, please don't get angry." They quickly took out the wanted poster to show them. "We just came to ask something. Excuse me, does the person in the painting live here?" But because the painting is so poorly done, even they couldn't recognize that the person in the painting is their own master. After getting a positive response, they hurriedly walked out the door, saying the small door, "I'll take my leave, sorry to bother you." After saying this, they ran home without looking back. Even Jiang Yuetian, who had just returned, didn't recognize him. When he got the wanted poster that drifted down with the wind and carefully examined its contents, what he never expected was, even the person on the poster didn't recognize the drawing of himself. Qi Mengshu, who had the cultivation of a half-immortal, was described as a salesman by Ye Yu-chan. This made Qi Mengshu furious, but there was nothing he could do about it. After all, Ye Yu-chan is the protagonist's disciple. Seeing that this situation couldn't be resolved for a long time, suddenly, the appearance of a foot broke the deadlock. With one kick, he was sent directly into the trial tower. Then the trial tower slowly shrank. "I told you before, this girl is very cautious. You don't even look friendly to her. You two have been dragging this out forever. Do you see him wavering?" Upon hearing this, Chimeng became furious and started to cry. You still look familiar. Go look in the mirror yourself. Besides, do you want me to kick that girl in like you did? I am a gentleman. I can't do something as rude as that. Watching as Night Rain successfully entangles into the Shirlian Tower, the male lead plans to move on to the next step of his plan. Then, the male lead transformed into Yi Yuchan's former master, while Qi Mengshu became Yi Yuchan's senior sister. Even though it's fake, you shouldn't let your guard down. Otherwise, exposing your identity would be a huge loss. At this moment, the male lead is comforting Qi Mengshu, while also enjoying the thrill brought by his actions. What happened next was predictable. Qi Mengshu finally couldn't hold back. He threw a punch at the male lead's face. But seeing how much the male lead just enjoyed it, he got curious about how it felt. Then he turned around and started fiddling with it himself. It wasn't that bad. For one, it made him feel like he'd just opened the door to a new world. It spiraled out of control. In the end, it was the male lead who dragged him. That made him stop. After all, they still had important business to attend to. The scene shifts. At this moment, Yi Yuchan was unconscious inside the tower, lying on the ground. As he slowly woke up, he found himself in a strange tower. And here, he felt that his body was particularly heavy. He couldn't muster any strength at all. Seeing no way out, Yi Yuchan had no choice but to use his spiritual source power to unblock his body. But just as he wanted to channel the spiritual source power, he realized he couldn't use it at all. He recalled what that strange person had said earlier. This trial tower is used for secluded cultivation. It will suppress one's spiritual power. You can only leave after passing the trial. While Yi Yuchan was thinking, he noticed someone entering. He immediately became alert. He looked toward the door, and saw two figures slowly approaching him. As the smoke cleared, Yi Yuchan finally saw their faces. It turned out to be her former master and senior sister, Yi Yuchan. How dare you not bow when you see your master? What about the rules of your sect? Faced with the people who had hurt her before, Yi Yuchan did not give them a friendly look, shamelessly slapping him. When you were digging up Lin Zhen, how could you forget that I'm your disciple? Now you're trying to morally coerce me into bowing to you. Do you think you deserve that with his attitude? The pretentious mentor immediately warns him. Yi Yuchan, you must not disrespect your master. Apologize quickly. However, Yi Yuchan did not compromise. He even talked about wanting him to admit his mistake. Stop dreaming. To those who have hurt him, Yi Yuchan usually doesn't show any kindness. After all, he almost lost his life at the time. If the male lead hadn't noticed in time, but now is not the time for him to dwell on this issue. Instead, the immediate situation should be dealt with first. Then, Yi Yuchan noticed several bows hanging on the wall behind him. In this tower of heartbreak, zero primordial force cannot be used, so the best option is a weapon. He quickly jumped back a few steps. Grabbing a bow from the wall, he aimed it at them. Yi Yuchan needed to strike first this time. This time, he didn't want to run away again. With a whoosh, Yi Yuchan unhesitatingly released his bow. The sharp arrowhead shot straight towards his former master. This clearly shows that Yi Yuchan is no longer who he used to be. However, at this critical moment, the three flying swords were blocked by Qi Mengshu, disguised as food. How long have you been away from the sect? So you're this reckless now? You can't even defeat your senior sister, and you still want to challenge me? Faced with his warning, Yi Yuchan didn't take it to heart. He simply said those three strikes were just a warm-up. Then his whole figure began to blur. He picked up a bow and arrow and attacked them. The speed is so fast that two afterimages have already appeared. He keeps leaping back and forth inside the tower, using the two of them as the center. Then he shoots out flying swords, forming a 360-degree impenetrable sword array. And the two within the sword array can only keep dodging the incoming swords. No matter how hard they tried to dodge, there would always be a moment of carelessness. Then a flying sword pierced right through Qi Mengshu's fake chest. This made Qi Mengshu start to panic. The male lead even took the time to remind him not to blow his cover. Then Qi Mengshu, taking advantage of Yi Yuchan's distraction, hurriedly pulled the sword out of the fake chest, quietly muttering that it would have been better if he were petite and cute like Yi Yuchan. Even though he was muttering softly, Yi Yuchan still overheard him. To everyone's surprise, in the next second, she lifted her own skirt. At first, the protagonist and the others didn't know what Yi Yuchan was doing, until they saw that her skirt was filled with gunpowder. She was practically a walking arsenal. Only then did they understand. Yi Yuchan had secretly hidden so many explosives behind their backs. He then tied the explosives to the arrows. He drew the bow and shot toward them. With a whoosh, 3 arrows carrying explosives flew straight out. When the arrows hit them, they exploded instantly. When the smoke cleared, both of them were lying at Yi Yuchan's feet. Looking at the 2 people collapsed on the ground, Yi Yuchan finally felt he had vented his anger. And just at that moment, a voice appeared in Yi Yuchan's mind, catching his attention. The result is decided. The victor, please extract the loser's spiritual root. After saying this, a dagger appeared before Yi Yuchan, as proof of clearing the level. Otherwise, you won't be able to unlock the next stage. What do you think Yi Yuchan will choose? Will she take out their spiritual roots, or give up the right to pass? If you were given a chance to eliminate those who once hurt you, would you get rid of them without hesitation? Should I choose to give up? At this moment, Yi Yuchan trembled as she took the dagger in front of her, but her heart was deeply conflicted. Am I really going to become like they were back then? Because now, Yi Yuchan only needs to stab down once, and they will understand the pain she endured at that time. When she prepared to stab down, she suddenly stopped. At this moment, Yi Yuchan realized she couldn't do this. Because she had once promised the male lead to let go of her hatred, she couldn't break her promise. If she were to take the spiritual roots of these 2, her senior brother and sister would be disappointed in her. So she decided to spare them, and let go of the hatred in her heart. In the end, Yi Yuchan chose to give up. He gave up the chance to clear the level, seeing that it was impossible to pass. He had no choice but to wait here for the protagonist to appear, until he could be taken out of the trial platform. But unexpectedly, the trial tower suddenly informed him that he had passed the test. He even received a martial skill as a reward. With the martial skill in hand, he instantly became happy. I didn't expect this unintended action to actually allow me to clear the stage. It turns out that in this trial tower, victory is not the key, rather, it is how to treat the defeated. That is the true essence of the trial. Soon, another notification from the trial tower arrived. The teleportation is about to begin. Please prepare, trial takers. About to enter level 2. That was so sudden. Yi Yuchan was originally planning to figure out what was going on with the 2 people on the ground, but unexpectedly, with a whoosh, he was teleported to the 2nd level of the trial tower. Meanwhile, the 2 people on the ground returned to normal, but the male lead's hand was in a strange place. Then, using some momentum, the male lead stood up on the spot. But Qi Mengshu was crushed by him, coughing up blood. Enraged, Qi Mengshu got up and cursed the protagonist's entire family. But the protagonist had no time to deal with him. He said he still needed to catch up and check the situation. The scene shifts. Inside the 2nd level of the trial tower, lightning is striking everywhere. And Yi Yuchan, who was inside, kept dodging it. But for some reason, the lightning only pursued him. In the end, he couldn't dodge and was struck by several bolts of lightning. The force was so great that it directly blew apart Yi Yuchan's clothes. This scene is truly classic. Coincidentally, this moment was clearly witnessed by the male lead and his companion, who had just arrived. Then the male lead immediately punched Qi Mengshu. He urged him to quickly close his eyes and not look. He also said that only he could see his disciple. Faced with the shamelessness of the male lead, Qi Mengshu directly cursed him out. However, it had no effect on him at all. Later, the male lead thought about it. It seemed that Qi Mengshu was not very useful in this situation. Immediately, the male lead sent him out of the trial tower. Unexpectedly, he considered the male lead a brother, while the male lead regarded him as just a tool. I never expected that the male lead would be such a shameless person. In order to keep all the benefits for himself, he ruthlessly sent Qi Mengshu out of the trial tower. After sending him away, the male lead stood by and watched as Yi Yuchan was struck by lightning. Seeing that he was about to give up, Yi Yuchan turned around and unexpectedly noticed something in the center. With no other option, he had to try a desperate measure. He quickly ran toward the top of the skull. What he didn't expect was that this very skull top was the key to triggering the lightning strikes. Yi Yuchan actually went right inside. The following scene was predictable. Countless bolts of lightning struck at Yi Yuchan within the skull. The sheer force. He was left with nothing but his remaining clothes. They even released the sealed monster within him. At this moment, a chilling aura of magic spread throughout the top. The male lead couldn't understand why it had come out again. It was like an endless sticky mess. It was never ending. It was driving him crazy. Meanwhile, the night rain cicada, controlled by the monster, slowly crawled out from below. Old bastard, long time no see. I told you I would definitely come back. With his appearance, the protagonist started getting serious. But just as he set foot on the ground, He immediately fired a shot at the protagonist. Then he forcefully threw an energy ball, which flew straight at the protagonist. Meanwhile, the male lead wasn't idle. He took out a guqin from his spatial ring, then sat cross-legged on the ground, placing the guqin on his lap. I don't want to see you right now. Get lost immediately. After that, he raised his right hand slightly, gently plucking the strings. One move of Gunera to banish the demon. It charged straight towards the monster. When the two forces collided, boom! A powerful energy was generated. Now the monster started to panic, hastily shouting, "You old bastard, you tricked me again." But the hero wouldn't let him off so easily. You only have two choices now. 1, you keep getting played by me. Or 2, go back and stay inside the magic circle. But the demon didn't listen to the protagonist. It seemed like it still wanted to struggle a bit longer. At this moment, the demon inside Knight and Cicada was stirring restlessly. It's easy to invite a god, hard to send one away. Do you think I'm still the same person as before? You still want me to leave? Not a chance. Old man, I won't let your grandson off the hook today. He thought he would be safe inside the Night Rain Cicada. Little did he know, the male lead's clone had already entered the Night Rain Cicada. And he mocked him for looking so foolish. No wonder the other elites don't want to play with you. For a moment, he began to doubt his appearance. Then he looked at himself in the mirror. But he didn't think he looked ugly at all. But then he thought, this is inside Night Rain Cicada. Who was just talking to him? By the time he realized, it was too late. He saw a large hand pressing down on him. With just a simple slap, he was directly pushed into the formation. Once he's sealed within the formation, the giant hand will dissipate. At this moment, we see the male protagonist stretching lazily while picking mushrooms on the formation. You can act tough all you want, but the protagonist treats you like a fool. Even though the demon hides within the Night Rain Cicada and makes vicious threats, showing a cocky expression, the male lead can still pin the monster down and rub it in the dirt. Yet the monster has no way to deal with the male lead at all. Let's see how arrogant he still is. At this moment, the monster under the male lead's feet is begging for mercy. It seems to have gotten a bit smarter than before. And he immediately agrees with the male lead. Unfortunately, the male lead isn't falling for that. Just make sure to use your brain more in the future. Stop showing off when there's nothing to do. I'll let you live with just one breath. Before leaving, the monster even politely saw the protagonist off. Take your time, sir. Come by and play when you have time. Then Yi Yu-chan returned to peace, and fell into slumber. Watching as the monster appeared again and again, the main character feels that they need to quicken their steps toward Jitian prison, so that thing doesn't come out again. To harm Yi Yu-chan, the main character's fingers were moving continuously over Yi Yu-chan's body, transmitting energy into him. After this tempering process, the main character discovered that his meridians were still seriously blocked and decided to take this opportunity to clear them. However, unexpectedly, the main character found that the lightning entity came out on its own. This guy is rarely seen, but using it to unblock meridians is more effective than silver needles. Then, the main character fiercely glared at it, ordering it to come over. Without hesitation, the main character directly grabbed it and rubbed it back and forth. This frightened it into quickly explaining that it was practicing the 7-trick technique. That damned boss of mine made me strike everyone I see. I'm just a worker, how could I dare go against my boss's orders? But the male lead didn't care about that at all. He directly ordered him to shut up, then dragged him in front of Yi Yu-chan, saying, "See the acupoints I marked on him?" At this point, the lightning squad, caught in the clutches of the villain, immediately started sucking up, saying, "This is an awe-inspiring, ghost-weeping masterpiece." But the male lead didn't appreciate the flattery and directly ordered the lightning squad to strike the acupoints he'd marked. The lightning squad, receiving the command, didn't dare slack off, mustering all their strength to unleash several bolts of lightning. After another intense scene, only a few stubborn scraps of fabric remained. As the lightning continued to shatter Yi Yu-chan's meridians, his whole body started to bulge with veins, as if he was about to explode. However, with the male lead present, there was no way anything would happen to Yi Yu-chan. Then, the male lead once again began playing the guqin, and the beautiful melody seemed to take on a life of its own, continuously nourishing Yi Yu-chan's body, while his expression gradually became more peaceful. In the end, he looked as if he was enjoying it. Seeing the changes in Yi Yu-chan, the male lead finally felt relieved. Just a second ago, he had kicked her out of the Tower of Heartbreak, so he could have everything to himself. But the next moment, he scurried back to her side. wanting to ask for her help. To be shameless to this extent, that's truly unmatched. If Chi Mengshu could take on the protagonist, he'd definitely knock him to the ground. And the protagonist is here this time, hoping to release Yeu-chan once this trial is over. But for someone as principled as Chi Mengshu, that's just impossible. Every challenger must pass through all 81 trials to come out. However, he hadn't finished speaking. He felt his breathing becoming rapid, and there was also a coughing sound. No need to think too much. It must be the male lead's doing. At this moment, Chi Mengshu held his throat, and looked uncomfortable, but the male lead doesn't seem to care about his situation. After all, Chi Mengshu is like this now because his true form is in the male lead's hands. He has to do whatever the male lead wants him to do. Then, we see the male lead grabbing his neck, and holding his head. Unable to endure the torment, Chi Mengshu has no choice but to agree to the male lead's request. The scene shifts, and in the Tower of Heartbreak, Yu, confused, wakes up to the sound of cicadas in the night rain. When he looked around, he found that the lightning on this level had disappeared, and his clothes were completely renewed. His wounds had mysteriously healed, but no matter how hard Yeu-chan tried to recall, he couldn't remember who had helped him. In the end, he gave up on the thought, and prepared to move on to the next stage. However, just as he looked up, he saw an infuriated Chi Mengshu saying to him, "You've passed the second trial. Hurry up and leave this place. Just getting struck by lightning means I passed. I haven't done anything yet. Didn't you say there were 3 trials?" Facing Yeu-chan's doubts, Chi Mengshu couldn't be bothered to respond. "I am the master of the Shirshin Tower. I want to do whatever I want. I'm tired now. I need to sleep, so I cancelled the 3rd level." After saying that, I lifted my leg, wanting to kick him out of the trial tower like the male lead. But unexpectedly, Yeu-chan seized the opportunity to hug my thigh. He said pitifully, "You haven't given me the level reward yet. You already gave it for the 1st level. You're not planning to cheat at this stage, are you?" Regarding Yeu-chan's actions, Chi Mengshu felt that this master-disciple duo was truly more troublesome than one could imagine. Then, he turned and said, "Why don't you try using your Lingyuan power to see?" At first, Yeu-chan looked puzzled. But when he activated his power, he realized that his Lingyuan force now carried a lightning effect. Chi Mengshu, standing nearby, explained that this was the reward for reaching the 2nd level. "Now, you possess the elemental physique, the lesser thunder celestial body." Upon hearing this, Yeu-chan's pupils dilated. She couldn't quite believe this fact. After all, this was the same elemental constitution as the 21 ultimate. It was also something countless people dreamed of. But don't celebrate too early. With your current cultivation, even if you possess the elemental constitution, he was 100,000 miles away from the ultimate strength of level 21. However, upon hearing this, Yeu-chan did not feel disheartened. Instead, he became even more determined in his cultivation. He then happily left the trial tower. He was completely unaware of the male lead who was quietly protecting him. Indeed, having a well-connected master makes a difference. While others might never enter the trial tower in their lifetime, Yeu-chan managed to get in effortlessly, and she has also obtained the thunder element from within. This is the same elemental constitution as the 21 extremity. At this moment, Yeu-chan couldn't wait to try out its abilities. She came into the woods. She crouched down to gather her strength. Then with a whoosh, she jumped above the forest. Even Yeu-chan couldn't believe it. "I can actually jump this high." At this moment, he is in the air. He is preparing to test the little thunder body he obtained. Just how powerful is it? Then, during his experiment, he saw the energy sphere crashing down towards the ground. Seeing this scene, Chi Mengshu on the ground couldn't help but curse, "Damn girl. Stop it, Uncle 7. I'm not dead yet. How dare you blow up my house? Are you looking for a beating?" Then the male lead immediately patted him on the shoulder and said, "This tree. You're already so old. Don't hold grudges with the younger generation. It's not good for your health." In the end, the male lead agreed to his request. He let his disciple, Xiaobu, come over, to plant some good saplings for him again. Only then did he stop pursuing Yeu-chan's recklessness. With the male lead's guarantee, Chi Mengshu turned around, saying he was tired, and wanted to go back into hibernation. But normally, he isn't like this. The male lead immediately felt something was off. He then asked what was really going on. Chi Mengshu only gave him a vague answer. She sensed that someone might be causing trouble for the 21 level system. But regarding their strength, he thought they shouldn't be in such a sorry state. However, Chi Mengshu believed as long as he was there, he had them completely suppressed. The male lead thought so too upon hearing this. There was simply no way to have a proper conversation with him. Qi Mengshu could only wave goodbye to him sadly. Hopefully, when we meet again next time, you'll still be alive and well. After he walked far away, he slowly regained his composure. He raised his clenched fist. Then he looked at his own body in his hands. He wasn't even sure if he could live to meet again. The scene shifts. At this moment, Yi Yuchan happily walked out of the forest. She also heard the male lead calling her name. When she looked into the distance, she saw his figure. At this time, the male lead was lying leisurely on a rock, saying, "It seems the treasure you got from the Shirshin Pagoda made you quite satisfied, didn't it?" As soon as he said that, this surprised Yi Yuchan a bit. How did he know he had entered Shirshin? The male lead then explained to him that everything along the way was carefully planned by him. So the male lead was fully aware of his actions. But no matter how much the male lead explained, he still found it hard to believe. After all, Qi Mengshu was part of the 21st level system. Seeing that Yi Yuchan still didn't believe him, the male lead had no choice but to recount everything he had experienced. This time, Yi Yuchan finally started to believe him. The male lead took the opportunity to get a bit cheeky. He put his hand on Yi Yuchan's shoulder and pulled him hard. Yi Yuchan was painfully lifted off the ground. "How about I, your master, accompany you for 300 rounds? What do you think?" But Yi Yuchan isn't that dumb. She immediately slapped away the male lead's pervy hand, and said, "I'm not stupid. Practicing with you is just throwing myself under the bus, right? Whenever there's a chance. The male lead always tries to take advantage of Yi Yuchan. What can you do? He's just a natural perv. It's obvious to everyone." But Yi Yuchan didn't buy into his act at all. She immediately rejected his idea of practicing together. Seeing that his plan had failed, the male lead had no choice but to look for a high-level monster nearby. Then, centered around him, his divine power continuously spread outward, expanding to cover the entire forest. The hunt moment had begun. Finally, the protagonist's pupils dilate. It seems like he's discovered something interesting. Then he smiles slightly, and says, "It's decided, it's him." The scene shifts to a cliffside. Four figures are talking about something unknown. The camera zooms in. The three of them kept persuading her not to resist unnecessarily. You should just obediently go back with them. But she seemed to have no good feelings towards them at all. Gritting her teeth, she said, "Don't call me junior sister anymore. If you say one more word, I'll cut out your tongue and feed it to the fish." Seeing that she was still stubbornly refusing to listen, they could only continue to persuade their junior sister. Just think about it. Senior brother is handsome and talented. He also has the cultivation of the spirit platform, and owns the Leitian casino. He's wealthy and powerful, that's great. But the more the girl heard this, the angrier she got. "Since you think that bastard Zhong Tianying is so great, why don't you marry him then? I'm not getting involved in this mess." After speaking, she raised her great sword and charged at them, swearing to carve a bloody path. The ferocity of the assault left them struggling to defend. One of them was even blasted away by Zhang Ruoxue. "Either defeat me and take me back, or get lost. Don't block my way. Besides, I, Zhang Ruoxue, have long been betrothed. In this life, I will marry no one else but him." As soon as those words were spoken, the atmosphere became awkward for a moment. He had only left the sect a few days ago, so how would he have time to meet someone and get married? Even after being exposed, Zhang Ruoxue still refused to admit it. Amid this deadlock, the male lead watched everything clearly from the sky. Then, in the next second, he came to Zhang Ruoxue's side, and pulled her into his arms. Taking the chance, he cast a binding spell on her, making Zhang Ruoxue collapse motionless in his embrace. He then made an internationally friendly gesture to the little Gagos. "It's 2022 already. How is forced marriage still a thing?" Faced with the inexplicably intruding male lead, the little Gagos won't show him any mercy. In an instant, they draw their swords and point them at the male lead. "Who is this kid, daring to meddle in our thunderstorm's affairs?" In response to their doubts, the male lead takes the opportunity to speak up, claiming he is Zhang Ruoxue's betrothed. But Zhang Ruoxue doesn't even know him. "Let me give you a piece of advice. Don't take the wrong path. Leave now and we'll pretend we never saw you. We don't know anything about you and junior sister. Otherwise, you'd be making yourself an enemy of the entire Lei sect." Hearing this, the male lead feigned an innocent look and said, "Are you threatening me?" Then he shouted loudly behind them, "Big sis, come quick, someone's bullying your little brother." Immediately, from the forest behind them, they faintly heard The sound of a giant approaching. A giant hand parted the branches in front of them. The enormous figure completely overshadowed their tiny bodies. Standing in front of them now was none other than the giantized Yi-Yu-chan. Have you ever seen an attack made? Now, right in front of us, there is one. Just when Zyagaga was astonished, the male lead picked up Zhang Ruoxue and jumped up. He directly landed on Yi-Yu-chan's weapon. Wasn't he supposed to use the giant inflatable technique to scare Zyagaga? But what's going on with the male lead jumping onto his chest? Faced with the male lead's secret move, Yi-Yu-chan was a bit angry, but for the thick-skinned male lead, he just ignored it completely. Looking at the giant before him, little Gaga was a bit troubled. After all, there was quite a size difference. There was no choice. They had to use their life-saving tools to face the giant Yi-Yu-chan. But this slight action also made the male lead realize something was off. Then, he specifically reminded Yi-Yu-chan to pay attention to the dark heart technique he taught earlier. Get ready to wait for them to finish their discussion. The little ones rushed up toward Yi-Yu-chan all at once. Just as the male lead anticipated, they immediately used their life-saving magical artifacts. But Yi-Yu-chan did not panic. Instead, he focused on gathering his power into his fists. With a powerful Hosai Lei burst, he collided with the little ones head-on. The scene was truly earth-shattering and soul-stirring. In the end, Knight and Cicada had the upper hand. With one punch, they blasted them away. At this moment, the blasted little Gaga collapsed on the ground, screaming in pain. One of the little Gagas, seeing the situation going south, immediately took out the illusion their master had prepared in advance. With a swoosh, a flash of red light shot out from the illusion. Then, an illusion even larger than Yi-Yu-chan appeared before the protagonist. Zivia made Yi-Yu-chan unsteady. She immediately fell to the ground. The protagonist, who was sitting on Yi-Yu-chan's chest, also bounced up. Who dares to harm a disciple of the Leiyu sect? Sensing he couldn't defeat the old man, Yi-Yu-chan asked the protagonist to handle him. With the protagonist's consent, Yi-Yu-chan began shrinking visibly at an incredible speed, until she returned to her original form. Seeing Yi-Yu-chan's actions, the old man was quite surprised, but the protagonist didn't pay much attention to it, and immediately started attacking. Do young people today have no sense of martial virtue? Losing a fight and then calling the parents? Well, as the parent, I guess I have to step in. Facing the protagonist's arrogance, the old man seems to recognize him as the one with the bounty from the Gong family. Before he could finish speaking, he exploded with a loud bang in mid-air, scattering into the air. It turns out that while he was speaking, the protagonist fired a rocket launcher at him. Can you believe it? Someone actually dared to block the protagonist's sect, and there are quite a lot of them. They surrounded it so tightly that not a drop could escape. Among them were the little Gaga guys from Leiyu sect, the big shots behind the casino. Also, the Gong family, whose member Gong Xingchen was killed by the protagonist. And finally, the people from Tianbei Valley, who were turned upside down by the protagonist. But only the younger generation came. The three groups didn't rush in immediately. Instead, they were arguing outside about who should strike first. After all, the rocket launcher in the protagonist's hands was no joke. While they were still stuck without a conclusion, the protagonist kicked his front door wide open. Then, he boldly walked right up to them. This was arrogance to the extreme. And not only that, the protagonist starts off by instantly provoking everyone, calling them a bunch of cowards. What are you all doing loitering around my doorstep? You've been dithering for ages and haven't sorted out anything. Might as well just shut up and ascend to heaven right here and now. What's even more absurd is, the protagonist doesn't even respect their abilities. He's still thinking he can single-handedly crush everyone present. Unfortunately, just as the male lead was about to take action, he was pulled inside by Yi-Yu-chan, who was hiding behind the door. Then with a bang, the door was shut by Yi-Yu-chan. This dramatic performance left them somewhat bewildered. Meanwhile, at Yuntian Academy, Yi-Yu-chan began to criticize the male lead's actions as a bit crazy. But the male lead didn't think much of it. In fact, he thought that what the male lead just did was like hitting a rock with an egg. He quickly labeled the male lead as a weakling. Then he comforted the male lead, saying there was no need to act tough. It was understandable that he couldn't win. Right now, we need to think of a plan. We can't just confront them head-on. During their conversation, a figure swept past them. At first, they couldn't see what it was. They only knew something had zipped by. It wasn't until they reacted and looked toward the door that they realized it was Zhang Ruoxue, armed. Then they saw him quickly reach the entrance. He stood before them, wielding a giant sword alone. Seeing that the newcomer was his fiancée, Zhong Tianying, his expression immediately darkened. He said to her, "You finally came out, junior sister Ruo Shui." However, Zhang Ruo Shui did not pay him any attention. Instead, she stood straight at the entrance, towering like a war god. Seeing another person about to go to their death, Yi Yuchan quickly ran over to stop her, but the male lead grabbed her. Then he pulled Yi Yuchan into his arms, saying, "Didn't you hear that someone was specifically after Zhang Ruoxue? It's her personal business. Why are you getting involved?" Faced with such irrational thinking from the male lead, Yi Yuchan tried hard to stop him. She even wanted to pull Zhang Ruoxue back, and go for a walk with everyone again. No matter how the male lead explains, his image as a weakling in Yi Yuchan's mind cannot be changed. There's nothing he can do. He can only let his disciples go and explain to Yi Yuchan, and they came running over excitedly, thinking the male lead was going to assign them a task. Little did they know, in Yi Yuchan's mind, the male lead turns out to be a total loser. No matter how he explains it, it's unlikely he can change his weak image in Yi Yuchan's mind. So, he decides to let his disciple prove that he's actually very strong. But Yi Yuchan still doesn't understand what they mean. Could they be planning to fight the group outside? The scene shifts. At that moment, Zhang Ruoxue outside shouts loudly, "You bunch of trash. Listen up, all of you. I was the one who fled the marriage. I was the one who injured that person. If there's any issue, come at me. Don't involve the innocent." It's just a pity that Zhang Ruoxue was too naive. Because they never intended to let the male lead go. He was merely a byproduct. Upon hearing this, Zhang Ruoxue let out a cold laugh. Then, he revealed a shocking secret. The reason the Lei Yu sect wanted to capture him was because he was merely being used as the vessel for their Hahuan cultivation technique. After Zhang Ruoxue learned this, he fled. He swore never to return to the sect. As soon as these words were spoken, the people around started whispering. They were all criticizing Lei Yuzong for using dark techniques. Even Zhong Tianying didn't expect him to reveal this secret in public. Meanwhile, the male lead at Yintian Academy heard about the Hahuan technique. Instantly, his expression darkened. He never expected that in his past, there was a memory of being hurt by the Hahuan technique. At that time, he seemed to spare no one involved in the matter. "You knew but said nothing. You're all accomplices. You deserve to die right now." The protagonist's fury is reignited. Perhaps another massacre is about to unfold. Meanwhile, the crowd outside the door remains oblivious to the impending danger. They're still relentlessly biting like a pack of wolves. Are you truly unrepentant? But you are, from head to toe, inside and out, a member of the Thunder Rain sect. What right do you have to leave the sect? Now is the time for you to repay the Thunder Rain sect. Seeing that the Thunder Rain sect had no intention of letting her go, in that case, Zhang Ruoxue decided to give everything back to them. Then he raised the giant sword and swung it in his direction. Blood immediately splattered everywhere. The onlooking little ones were also greatly shocked. This was something they never expected. Zhang Ruoxue actually swung the sword and severed his left hand. Not only that, he also threw the giant sword at Zhong Tianying. After all, this was their magical weapon in the thunderstorm. The giant sword that was thrown landed right in front of Zhong Tianying. He was startled and shivered. In the end, Zhang Ruoxue decided to give up her cultivation to repay her debt to the Thunder Rain sect. She did this right in front of them. The little Gagaga in the audience transformed from surprise to admiration for her courage. After this farce, the Thunder Rain sect's reputation was utterly ruined. Since Zhang Ruoxue no longer had any value for them, the leader of the Thunderstorm sect deemed him a demoness. He thought about killing her in public. This would restore the sect's reputation. Everyone has long buried memories. Even the male lead is no exception. He watched helplessly as his senior sister died before his eyes. All he could do was eliminate all the accomplices. This time, his opportunity has come. The protagonist can finally settle the score with them. At this moment, the Thunder Rain sect's leader, who was about to strike Zhang Ruoxue one last time, suddenly found his spiritual power dissipating for no reason, and his voice could no longer make a sound. Meanwhile, the unconscious Zhang Ruoxue, who had lost an arm, was caught by someone's hand. That hand even healed his wound. It turns out the protagonist was behind it all. "Kids, you mustn't fight at the school gate. Otherwise, you might get disciplined. And for kids who talk rudely, I'll have to mute you for a little while." Looking at Zhang Ruoxue in his hands, the male lead couldn't help but admire his courage. Then he called Yi Yuchan to come help him down, because now it's the male lead's turn to step in. After all, this is an old grudge with the remnants of the Hehuan technique. At this moment, Yi Yuchan successfully brought Zhang Ruoxue in. She brought the barely conscious girl before her senior sister. But as the eldest senior brother, Bu Wangjun was somewhat puzzled. Just moments ago, the male lead said to let them handle Xiao Gaga. Why did he rush in now? Faced with the disciples' doubt, the male lead provided this explanation: I was feeling restless. So the practical class became on-site teaching. Xiao Yuzhen summoned 2 bolts of lightning to add to the excitement. As for the protagonist's strange request, Yi Yuchan didn't refuse. She just thought he always came up with flashy tricks. Then, 2 bolts of lightning struck the front gate. Looks like Yi Yuchan wanted to use thunder to shatter the darkness. Seeing 2 huge craters suddenly appear at his doorstep, the protagonist felt as if thousands of alpacas were stampeding through his heart. You little brat. Who told you to blow up your own doorstep? Do you know how expensive it is to fix the ground? Do you know how tiring it is for me to supervise Xiaogu planting trees? Faced with the male lead scolding, Yi Yuchan felt a bit guilty. Didn't you tell me to create some thunder for fun? You know my level of controlling thunder, right? But halfway through speaking, his expression changed. It seemed he had discovered something extraordinary. Then he shouted, stop scolding. Quick, look behind you. Regarding Yi Yuchan's anxious reaction, the male lead was indifferent. He simply turned his head to look behind. A gigantic 5-clawed golden dragon appeared before the male lead. The intimidation from the dragon was truly formidable. Then, the dragon soared into the sky, accompanied by the sound of dragon roars. This scene made Yi Yuchan a bit flustered. Was he about to be completely overwhelmed? However, once he calmed down and thought it through, from the past until now, the male lead has never missed. This time should be fine too. Just using an ordinary giant spirit talisman can fuse everyone's spiritual energy together. It creates such a powerful dragon force. Zhongtian should start flattering the elder of the Gong family, to curry favor with the Gong family. However, what he really wants in his heart is to enjoy Zhang Ruoxue tonight. Don't you think this dragon is impressive? But in the protagonist's eyes, he was nothing. Because by this time, the protagonist had already planted explosives inside him. This move shocked Yi Yuchan. But Lin Yuan was already used to it. Then the protagonist detonated the explosives. The entire giant dragon was blown to pieces, and the protagonist jumped out from inside the dragon. A perfect landing finish. So, did you learn all the moves just now? You fell for it. Inside the dragon's belly. Blah blah blah. Who knows what you're even doing? But senior brother Gu Wangjun had a serious look, ready to speak. He explained the entire process of what the protagonist did. The others beside him also expressed that what the senior brother said was correct. They all learned from this wave of teaching. Only Yi Yuchan was still in the dark. With his strength, he couldn't understand the male lead's actions at all. Regarding the dragon being dealt with in one move by the male lead, the Gong family was still unwilling to give up. They were still thinking of causing trouble. Meanwhile, Zhong Tianying was already scared out of his wits. But Gong Jia wanted to continue. He had no choice but to cheer and clap from the sidelines. Then, all the little ones stepped back, leaving only the 3 leaders. Facing their renewed attack, the male lead transformed. He began muttering, since you younger ones are being unreasonable, now you're teaming up against me. Looks like I'll have to teach you all a lesson again. You little brats. A live demonstration. Keep your eyes wide open. Watch and learn. But the protagonist realizes they've already gone to the break table, eating sunflower seeds and cheering him on. They don't look like his students at all, it's more like he's performing live for them. But now is not the time to teach them a lesson, because the male lead has already been surrounded by the little gaggas. Although this is of no use to him, they have to try something. Then the formation surrounding the male lead rose dramatically. It looked impressive, but in the eyes of the male lead, it was just 5 flowers. Just as the male lead was rambling on, the 5 people maintaining the formation simultaneously disappeared. Faced with this situation, the male lead remained very calm and leisurely gave them a name. He then observed the formation and found that they were doing quite well. However, soon their offensive began. Several meteors fell from above the male lead. Although it looked impressive, he easily dodged them. Seeing that they could only ambush him from the dark, the male lead had no choice but to use a bit of strength to force them out. The male lead kicked the recently frozen meteors into various corners, which coincidentally hit the little gaggas maintaining the formation, causing them to spit out blood. The formation that trapped the male lead also fell apart. It seems they are not that powerful after all. The dramatic ups and downs made Zhong Tianyin feel like a clown. The protagonist is usually compassionate. He never kills his defeated opponents, at most just searches their souls or something. Whether they can hold on until the end is up to them. Faced with the protagonist's threat, Xiao Gaga was scared out of his wits and hurriedly called for the hidden Ninth Elder. As soon as the protagonist heard the term Ninth Elder, his face immediately darkened. Before he could continue questioning, the sky suddenly dimmed, and the air was filled with a corrosive smell. What the protagonist didn't expect was that before he even used the soul-searching technique, the sinister old man who had taught and practiced forbidden techniques appeared on his own. At this moment, an old man stepped out from the crowd. The little brat was so terrified of the old man that he kept retreating. "Kid, you're quite arrogant. Even dared to go after the life of the Thunderstorm sect's leader." After speaking, he raised his hand and cast the soul lock to attack the protagonist. But in the face of this attack, the protagonist didn't dodge. He stood still and got bound by the soul lock. Seeing the protagonist hit by the Ninth Elder's skill, the fallen little Gaga starts mocking him. But with their strange confidence, the protagonist can't help but laugh, because in his eyes, these low-quality broken chains are like nothing. With a simple move, he shatters the soul lock. At this moment, the protagonist, with a grim expression, says to them, "Who do you bunch of losers think you're looking down on? Since you are so eager to die, then I shall grant you that wish." Then the old man's eyes emitted a green light, looking somewhat eerie. Immediately, the ground began to crack. Rubble and dirt floated into the air. The old man didn't care about the lives of those around him. Even the ground they were standing on began to rise into the air. Suddenly, a giant peak rose from the ground. Several chains flew out from inside. Once again, they bound the male lead. This time, they tightly locked his limbs, and trapped him at the bottom. Terrifying souls continuously seeped out below. Did you think this was the end? Then you are mistaken. Countless lost souls rushed towards the male lead like madmen. Unfortunately, this attack had no effect on him. Any lost soul that approached him would be terrified and flee. Now the souls kept their distance from him. They were afraid that getting too close would be disastrous. Then, the male lead broke free and jumped. Upon seeing this, countless lost souls immediately fled. After all, who told you to follow that old hawk outside? The key is you ran into me. I can only say you were out of luck. At this moment, the old man standing outside the roof seemed to realize there was no more movement inside. He had thought the male lead had already been devoured by the spirits. He was just a reckless kid after all. But before he could react, a fist landed squarely on his old face. The one who threw that punch. The protagonist breaks free from the restraints inside the cauldron. Not only that, he also breaks all of the man's limbs. His moves are fast, precise, and ruthless. He finishes with an uppercut. A perfect ending. The old man shoots into the sky with a swoosh. The protagonist gave him a free trip to heaven. A person who pays great attention to their image. You mustn't provoke him. Otherwise, in the next second, he might turn from a pretty boy into a bald brute. Facing the aggressive enemy, Zhang Ruoxue showed no fear. She charged straight at him head-on. In the next moment, both of their fists swung towards each other's faces. And none of them showed any intention of dodging. They took the hit head-on. Unfortunately, Zhang Ruoxue lacked Huang Mao's combat experience. With a swift movement, Huang Mao appeared behind him, just as he was about to get hit. Luckily, Yi Yuchan intervened in time. This saved Zhang Ruoxue from danger. Knocked the blonde to the ground. Turns out remote support is still useful. You can occasionally harass from a distance. Faced with the seamless cooperation of the two, the blonde had no choice but to get a bit more serious. After standing up, his entire aura was completely different from before. Seeing the terrifying aura coming from him, Yi Yuchan sensed something was wrong, but it was already too late. The blonde-haired man was right in front of him. He grabbed his calf, and forcefully slammed him to the ground. With a loud thud, he was thrown onto the iceberg. This hit left Yi Yuchan feeling quite uncomfortable. Blood kept coming out of his mouth as he coughed. However, Huang Mao didn't stop. He reached out and grabbed his head again. Kept smashing it onto the ice. It seemed like this was his source of joy, until the ice was covered with Yi Yuchan's blood. Only then did he stop and walk towards Zhang Ruoxue. Meanwhile, Zhang Ruoxue, because they realized that the two of them were no match for the blonde guy, so he could only run to the male lead for help. Unfortunately, he was thinking too simply. After dealing with Yi Yuchan, the blonde guy easily caught up with him. At this critical moment, Zhang Ruoxue looked at the iceberg nearby, and seemed to come up with a solution. Then, they immediately sprang into action. He launched several energy blasts at the blonde guy, but the blonde guy dodged them easily. During this, he even mocked Zhang Ruoxue. However, Zhang Ruoxue's real target wasn't him. It was the tip of the iceberg behind him. As ice shards and snow fell from above, he had no time to react. In the end, he was forcibly buried inside. Zhang Ruoxue still didn't let her guard down. She broke open the ice surface, and jumped into the water, unexpectedly escaping through the water route. She hurried to rendezvous with the male lead. They thought he could escape this time, but something unexpected happened. He never expected that Huang Mao also fled into the water, and ambushed him from behind. Seeing Huang Mao appear behind him, Zhang Ruoxue's eyes showed confusion and unwillingness. I know you're curious, but this is the true power of the peak of martial virtue. After hearing this answer, Zhang Ruoxue gradually loses consciousness in the water. The scene shifts. It cuts to the male lead. At this moment, he is leisurely sitting on an ice sculpture. Who would have thought that guy could transform? Interesting. Should I go over and help Yi Yu-chan and the others? But just as he finished speaking, he looked up at the sky, and realized that tonight is the full moon. Upon learning this, the male lead lay back down. It seems that this full moon night is of great significance to both of them. In fact, there is an indelible memory in the male lead's heart that he cannot forget. He never expected that after all these years, the enemy who killed his senior sister would appear before him once again. Not only that, now he has also fallen into the hands of the male lead. It seems this is fate. Then, in front of him, the male lead mentioned his senior sister, Duan Yuehong, the woman he had killed back then using the Hehuan technique. Hearing this, the old man immediately became alert. Back then, the Lightning Thunder sect had clearly sealed off all this information. Where did the male lead get this from? Facing his doubts, the protagonist did not shy away, but directly told the old man that Duan Yuehong was his senior sister. Hearing this, he started to panic, shouting loudly, "Are you also from Shanlei sect? Who exactly are you?" And the protagonist made sure he died with no regrets. He directly told him that he was Emperor Wen Xianlei. Just hearing this name, he was already sweating profusely, trembling in fear. The reason he managed to escape back then was all because of one person. That person was the male lead's master back then. He alone stood between the male lead and the old man. And during that battle back then, the male protagonist cleared out everyone related to the matter. Only he survived after the male protagonist severed his meridians and cultivation. If it weren't for his master stopping the male protagonist, he would have been dealt with long ago. Moreover, the male protagonist's master had assured him back then that he would be expelled to a place where you can't see him. But fate is like this. In the end, he still fell into the protagonist's hands. Last time, he was lucky to escape. This time, there's no way the protagonist will let him go. Then the protagonist simply snapped his fingers, and the surrounding Buddha statues began to move. The chains wrapped around the old man started pulling outward. Do you think the chains were pulling his body? If so, you're wrong. In fact, the chains were truly binding the old man's soul. As the force grew stronger, with a snap, the old man's soul was torn apart. In the end, his body stood there like a lifeless corpse, motionless. Even looking at his appearance, the protagonist felt it would taint his eyes. Then he simply cast a spell. He shattered his body into pieces. Sister, it's been 500 years. Your revenge has finally been avenged today. After dealing with this old man, I realized it was already the next day. At this moment, the male lead slowly walked out of the domain. He thought there shouldn't be anyone else here. But the male lead noticed something unusual. Then, with a loud bang, a shell exploded beside him. The male lead was completely stunned. He had no idea what was happening. Having just resolved years of hatred, the male lead was thinking of celebrating. Unexpectedly, he was suddenly hit by a shell as soon as he came out. The male lead was so scared that he froze. He had no idea what was going on. Once he snapped out of it, he immediately cursed, "Who the hell is bombing my turf again?" And it turned out to be the young blacksmith from before. He thought the male lead was in danger, so he rushed over as fast as he could. But unexpectedly, without knowing the situation, he fired at the male lead's side. This made the male lead very angry. However, he actually had other matters to attend to here, and they were two very important things. At this moment, the male lead was furious. Seeing that he was still being coy, the male lead directly pointed a cannon at his head. Watching this move from the male lead, He was so scared that he immediately took out a rather decent bow and arrow. When the protagonist got the weapon, he realized there was a problem. He had upgraded Yi Yu-chan's weapon to the highest quality. Seeing the protagonist's surprised expression, he didn't react much. He just assumed the protagonist was Yi Yu-chan's master, so that made him half his mentor as well. However, the weapon cannot recognize Yi Yu-chan as its owner, so it'll depend on his own fate. I don't need anything from you either. Last time the advance payment was for 10 crates. Is asking for 15 crates as the final payment too much? Looking at the quality of these weapons, the protagonist decisively agreed to his terms. Then he pulled him along with the weapons to the sect, eager to show them to Yi Yu-chan, and have Duansheng explain how to use them. As soon as she walked through the door, Yi Yu-chan threw herself into the male lead's arms, looking extremely worried for his safety. The male lead seemed a bit overwhelmed by Yi Yu-chan's sudden embrace. He then took out a weapon to attract her attention. While your uncle Duansheng is here, hurry up and try out your weapon. If something doesn't feel right, let him adjust it on the spot. At this moment, looking at the bow in his hand, Yi Yu-chan seems very satisfied. Then, holding the bow in his left hand, he forms an arrow with his right hand. Combining it with his cultivation, he fully draws the bow. He shot towards the main door. Fortunately, the male lead dodged in time. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Xiao Yuzhan, why are you shooting arrows at your teacher? Don't think you can act recklessly just because I spoil you. Do you understand? At this moment, Yi Yuzhan didn't feel ashamed. Instead, she started to cry. Facing this situation, the male lead started to panic a little. He kept trying to comfort Yi Yu-chan during this time. Ever since I became your disciple, I've been running around like a headless chicken following you, encountering all sorts of messy things. You never explain anything, and you often disappear with the enemy out of nowhere, like you did yesterday. No matter how strong you are, people will still worry. Hearing this, the male lead felt a bit ashamed, because he was too worried about his safety. Yi Yu-chan even cried. Faced with this situation, the male lead started to feel flustered. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. In the end, he had no choice but to blame it on his disciple. After all, they still haven't explained their identity to Yi Yu-chan. But for those who love watching the drama, this is the biggest highlight. How could they let it go? Now the male lead is in a dilemma. He can only bear it all by himself. There's no other way. He had no choice but to promise Yi Yu-chan that he would try to give her a heads up in the future. But seeing the male lead's expression, Yi Yu-chan was somewhat skeptical, with a hint of disdain. At that moment, Duansheng, standing nearby, suddenly said, Yi Yu-chan has already been acknowledged by this magical artifact. As for the two unique aspects of the ritual weapon, the first is that it can only fire swords condensed from the cemetery. As for the second point, he wasn't in a hurry to explain. Instead, he jumped down from the old pickled vegetable jar, and walked over to Yi Yu-chan. He planned to demonstrate it for him personally. When Duansheng took the bow and arrow, with a snap, he pressed a button on the bow. The bow then transformed into a hand cannon. In this state, the spiritual energy would increase several times. In simple terms, it means he can kill above his level. After saying that, Duansheng shot at the male protagonist. The power was tremendous. He directly sent the male lead flying out. It feels like he is taking the opportunity to beat up the male lead. Next, he explained the precautions to Yi Yu-chan, as well as how to maintain the magical weapon. Yi Yu-chan also noted everything down in a small notebook. After he finished speaking, he returned the bow and arrow to their rightful owner. He handed them to Yi Yu-chan. Then Yi Yu-chan took it away to have a good adjustment. He still had matters to discuss with the male lead. Yi Yu-chan didn't disturb them. Carrying the weapon, he happily left. He left the two of them waiting there. After Yi Yu-chan left, the male lead asked what else he needed to discuss. Duansheng opened the box in his hands. A blue light emanated from the box. It turned out to be the spiritual manifestation of the celestial warrior that was previously entrusted to him for repair by the agency. When the male protagonist saw this object, his expression immediately darkened. The person who could harm this thing was no ordinary individual. So the male protagonist decided to go to Yoshida quickly. Otherwise, he wouldn't feel at ease. From the monster inside Night Rain Cicada. When Qi Mengshu was leaving, she said something. Now it's about Lanyu Tianbing again. There must be some connection between these events. After explaining everything clearly, Wansheng took out a broom and prepared to leave. Here, he still needs to continue repairing Lanyu Tianbing's soul artifact. But what the male lead never expected, was that he had casually mentioned it before. He actually managed to make the magical broom. Before leaving, the protagonist escorted him to the gate. They waved goodbye. The scene shifts. At this moment, Yi Yu-chan is at the training grounds. The magic box's new weapon. He hasn't been practicing long. Before the protagonist quickly pulls him back. They were preparing to take him to Jitian prison to solve the mystery around him. As for how to get there, it's quite simple. The male lead said they would fly there. At first, Yi Yu-chan was completely confused, not understanding what he meant. In the end, the male lead held her down. And then they realized there were two chickens flirting in front of them. The hen became very shy when seen. At this moment, Yi Yu-chan finally understood that the plane the male lead mentioned was real. In the end, at the male lead's command, King Kong and Barbie got ready, and set off immediately. Have you ever flown a real plane? And not just any plane, but a fighter jet? Even Yi Yu-chan never expected that she would be able to sit in a fighter jet in her lifetime. Finally, at the protagonist's command, King Kong and Barbie were ready. They immediately set off, and the scene shifted. At this moment, the protagonist and his group were already flying at high altitude. Sitting in the mothership, Yi Yu-chan asked about the mother chicken beneath her. Is he your boyfriend? But King Kong replied, no, it's not. These are my 3 husbands. For a moment, Yi Yu-chan was speechless. Having a husband was one thing, but she didn't expect there to be so many on the male lead side. At this moment, Barbie asked where the male lead was going. The male lead answered truthfully that he was going to Jitian prison. Hearing it was such a distant place, Barbie thought the male lead had already worn the deathless flower. But upon being asked by Barbie, the male lead suddenly felt guilty. Seeing his expression now, Barbie realized something was off. When she found out that the male lead hadn't worn the flower, she immediately flew into a rage. She then informed King Kong with a shout. They all turned around together. Halfway through, they headed back to the sect. No matter how much the male lead persuaded them, it was useless. They insisted on going back to get the rafflesia before leaving. They went back very quickly. In an instant, Yi Yu-chan felt like she was on a roller coaster. The scene shifts. At this time, King Kong and Barbie were urging the Cloth King's army to pick the rafflesia. Meanwhile, Yi Yu-chan was vomiting non-stop. She never expected not to get airsick on Earth, but to get airsick here instead. As they were talking, a sound came from behind. When they turned around, they saw Zhang Ruoxue, who had just gotten out of bed, stumbling toward them. But due to her severe injuries, he passed out again. Fortunately, Yi Yu-chan caught him in time. He even said everything was fine now. The people outside had already been chased away by the senior disciples. Just stay here and rest for now. But despite Yi Yu-chan's good intentions, Zhang Ruoxue refused him. For a moment, both Yi Yu-chan and the male lead were confused. I have no idea what he means. As soon as I recover from my injuries, I will leave immediately. I will definitely not cause you any more trouble. Faced with his actions, Yi Yu-chan was somewhat worried. After all, his cultivation has been destroyed. He has also lost an arm. It's too dangerous to venture alone. At this moment, Yi Yu-chan is exchanging glances with the male lead, intending to have him take her in, so she'd have a junior sister. And after Yi Yu-chan's repeated pleas, the male lead finally agrees to take Zhang Ruoxue as a disciple. Then, the male lead tosses a ring to him. From this moment on, he became the male lead's 7th disciple. The moment Zhang Ruoxue received the ring, there was a loud bang. Once again, the justice of heaven descended. He was completely transformed, wearing the sailor uniform specially prepared by the male lead. But that's not all. The male lead grabbed his hand, and said he had something important to give him. Then he ran into a room, locking Yi Yu-chan outside. The two of them were alone in the room. Soon, the sound of heavy breathing came from inside. Yi Yu-chan immediately sensed something was wrong. Even King Kong had to cover Barbie's ears upon hearing it. Can you believe it? The male lead just took Zhang Ruoxue as his disciple, and they immediately got involved in some unspeakable secret. Even Yi Yu-chan cursed out loud when he heard it. The moment he pushed open the door, what he saw left him stunned. Zhang Ruoxue, who had lost her left arm, suddenly had a mechanical arm out of nowhere. This made Yi Yu-chan so happy that she rushed into Zhang Ruoxue's arms. She said, "That's great. This arm is so cool." But before she could be happy for too long, the male lead pulled Yi Yu-chan's hand and urged her to leave. Alright. He had finished his business as well. Let's hurry up and set off. But Yi Yu-chan wanted to take Zhang Ruoxue to Jitian prison with him. In the end, unable to resist Yi Yuchan's plea. The male lead had no choice but to agree to bring her along. The scene changes. The three of them are riding a plane, heading to Ji Tian prison. Suddenly, they hear the voice of senior brother Wang Jun, coming from behind. When they turn around to look, he found that he was also on a plane chasing after himself. Then he learned from his senior brother that Lin Yuan's condition was a bit strange. Upon hearing this, the male lead noticed something was off. He immediately ordered Barbie to turn around and return to the sect. The male lead wanted to see for himself what was going on. When they arrived at the sect, at this moment, Lin Yuan is lying in bed in great pain. Upon hearing of the protagonist's arrival, Lin Yuan slowly opens his eyes, but it would have been better if he hadn't. As soon as he opens them, he realizes his dual pupil physique has awakened. This is something the protagonist never expected. He thought Lin Yuan's age was too young for this awakening, but the event happened too suddenly. At the moment, the male lead has no choice but to take him to Jitian prison. Once there, they'll see if there's a way to heal him. Just like that, what was originally a journey for two turned into an adventure for four. Watching them as they walked away, Jiang Yuetian decided to set out on a trip. He went in search of an opportunity to break through his bottleneck. After saying that, he waved them goodbye. Who knows what kind of mischief this crossdresser will get into. The once bustling sect now had only the three of them left. They should start preparing as well. The scene shifts. At this moment, the protagonist's group had already arrived above the extreme sky prison. Gazing at the falling snow before them, it was Yi Yuchan's first time experiencing a snowy landscape, but seeing Yi Yuchan's surprised expression, the protagonist paid no attention. He just looked down. And below was the desolate snowy mountains. There was a lake above them. On the frozen surface were countless ferocious beasts with sharp, icy fangs. He recalled obtaining a silver frost flower here years ago. Perhaps it could help Jiang Yuetian break through his bottleneck. Then, the protagonist ordered the plane to land at the foot of the mountain. The scene shifted. On the other side of the snowy mountain, the trio is searching for something. By the princess's order, we must complete it, even at the cost of our lives. Hurry and bring back the silver frost flower. What's wrong with you today? Why are you acting so timid? Facing Fan Luokue's questioning, they immediately explained that the haunted snow mountain had been plagued by ghosts recently. They say it's an unrelenting snow spirit. But just as they finished talking, they saw something moving in the distance. Because the heavy snow was obscuring part of their view, they mistook the figure ahead for the snow spirit. What's it like to be mistaken for a snow spirit? Let Yi Yuchan tell you. Because the beast on the lake was so terrifying earlier, Yi Yuchan was too scared to walk on the ice. This left the male lead speechless. He didn't expect Yi Yuchan to be so timid, but with Yi Yuchan riding on his back, the male lead felt a bit uncomfortable. Having no choice, he had to tempt Yi Yuchan down with cultivation techniques. Upon learning that he could freely pick a few techniques, Yi Yuchan immediately became interested. But at that moment, a hidden weapon flew towards Yi Yuchan from a distance. Fortunately, both of them reacted quickly. The male lead successfully caught the hidden weapon, and Yi Yuchan jumped down from the male lead. They perfectly coordinated to evade the attack. Moreover, the male lead praised Yi Yuchan for her quick reaction. Looking at the three figures approaching in the distance, the male lead still can't figure out why he is being targeted here when he has no enemies. How could he be schemed against for no reason? As they got closer to him, the leader, Fan Luokue, said, "I'll go save that man. You two are responsible for stopping the snow woman." As soon as he said this, the male lead and Yi Yuchan were both completely confused. What's even more absurd is, it's one thing for Yi Yuchan to be mistaken for the snow maiden. But unexpectedly, the male lead was pounced on by Fan Luokue. This beautiful scene was deeply etched into Yi Yuchan's heart. Don't worry, we adjudicators will protect you. As an old virgin who's lived for hundreds of years, I never thought one day a beautiful woman would. Protect yourself. This scene left Yi Yuchan completely petrified. Why did I become the victim? While he became the one being protected, Shui and I don't think you can harm anyone in front of our judges. Surrender peacefully. The two henchmen nearby also warned Yi Yuchan not to move, though the man was a bit scared. However, this doesn't prevent Yi Yuchan's anger. After all, he was called the Snow Woman. Yet the male lead didn't explain. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. He directly took out the broken kidney and gave him his bow and arrow, to protect the seemingly delicate male lead. Fan Luokue was prepared to take action himself. If this continues, the male lead thinks the upcoming fight scene will be exciting. It might even turn into a love triangle between two women and one man. Just imagining it gets him fired up. But to prevent things from escalating further, he steps up to explain the situation. After hearing his explanation, Fan Luokue finally lowers her weapon. She then asks what they're doing here. In order not to reveal his plans, the male lead had to start bluffing. He claimed he was here to find a secret place, but the excuse was too far-fetched, making Fan Luokue skeptical. After all, he's never heard of any secret texts here. Although it was just a misunderstanding, Fan Luokue still felt he was being a bit impolite. He then walked up to Yi-Yu-chan, and gave him a 90-degree bow to apologize. As the captain of the judgment team, I must take responsibility for my mistake. Seeing him apologize so formally, Yi-Yu-chan was a bit at a loss. After all, it was just a misunderstanding, but Fan Luokue seemed oblivious, as if he was missing something. He insisted on getting a chance to make it up to Yi-Yu-chan. Now look at this. It's like he's latched onto Yi-Yu-chan. He won't let go of that opportunity. Who else could treat the male lead like a weakling and protect him? Probably only him, right? I thought this was going to be a battle between two women fighting for one man. Exciting and intense. To prevent things from getting worse, the male lead had no choice but to step up and explain. After realizing he had misunderstood Yi-Yu-chan, he insisted on asking her for a chance to make it up to her. In the end, she couldn't refuse him. She had no choice but to agree to his request. As a gesture of apology, we'll act as your guards then. Otherwise, with your strength, you wouldn't be able to walk out of this desolate snow mountain alive. But facing such a stubborn girl, the male lead has no way to deal with her. He can only let her come along. Then, the group set off on their journey to find the secret realm. Although this is a trick played by the male lead, the scene shifts. The male lead brought them to an abandoned castle. Looking at his unreliable master, Zhang Ruoxue, he felt he shouldn't have come along. Meanwhile, Fan Luokue's underling seemed to have noticed something. It hadn't even been 15 minutes before the male lead found the secret manual. He was far too familiar with arid snow mountain. Could he be here looking for the silver cold ice flower, just like them? Upon hearing this, Fan Luokue's face immediately darkened. If that's truly what he thinks, he definitely won't let the male lead and his group have the silver cold ice flower. But before confirming, he can't act rashly. He can only try to probe the male lead's intentions on the side. The little girl is quite suspicious. Look at my innocent face. Do I look like someone who would lie? If you don't believe me, you can go try for yourself. Since the male lead said so, he took the lead and walked into the ruins. But as soon as he went in, he noticed something unusual. The scene inside was completely different from what he saw outside. Inside, he saw tree branches and stone figures charging at him, roaring. They appeared tall and strong, but in reality, they were nothing more than mere lifeless forms. 7 insignificant objects. Fan Luokue easily defeated all the stone figures in just a few moves. It was incredibly easy for him. After he finished them off, he instructed the male lead that they could come in. But just as Zhang Ruoxue was about to enter, she was stopped by the male lead. Then he drew a circle at the feet of Lin Yuan and Zhang Ruoxue, instructing them to stay inside. Do not come out. After all, they were useless right now. Not only that, the male lead thoughtfully took out something good for him, so he could use it to pass the time when he was bored. After settling them down, the male lead and Yi-Yu-chan walked into the ruins. But as soon as they entered, a huge magic circle appeared on the ground, and in the middle of the circle was a large pit. Countless bones were floating above it. Meanwhile, the young girl noticed that these bones belonged to members of her sect. Immediately, Fan Luokue drew his weapon. After all, it was the protagonist who brought them to the secret realm. From the moment you found this place so easily, I thought something was off with you. What's going on here? Please explain yourself. Facing his accusations, the protagonist doesn't want to explain further. After all, the dried blood on the ground, and the rotting bodies in the pit, clearly show they've been dead for many years. He never thought one day he would be falsely accused too. At first, he spoke kindly to Fan Luokue. Later, the protagonist bluntly pointed out the dried blood on the ground, and the rotting bodies in the pit. It's obvious they've been dead for years. Do you need any more explanation? But the more reasonable the protagonist sounds, the more suspicious Fan Luokue becomes. To avoid raising suspicion, he decides to play along for now, waiting to gather solid evidence. He must personally bring the main character back to Shinpan Gong for investigation. But because this formation is too strange, they couldn't break through at all. Afterwards, the main character had no choice but to take out a teleportation scroll he carried with him. Seeing such a valuable item, the main character even gave them one. This made Fan Luokue's suspicion deepen a bit. Meanwhile, Yi, who noticed something was off. Yu-chan asked the male lead through brainwaves what was going on with those people. The male lead didn't shy away. He told her that he killed them. After all, they broke into his home. They even dared to attack the owner. Upon hearing this, Yu-chan felt a bit jealous. She said, "Isn't your home Yuntian Academy? How did it turn into your home here? Is this the place where your fellow townsman lives?" Faced with Yu-chan's question, the male lead gave him a whack on the head. "What on earth are you thinking about all day long? This was my home before." Then the scene shifted. They were transported by a scroll to a grand entrance. Looking at the towering gate in front of them, Fan Luokue asked the male lead if this is your final destination. The male lead did not shy away from the question. This is exactly where he wanted to be. At first, the male lead thought about showing off to Yu-chan. He wanted to explain how impressive his little guard was. But just as the male lead was about to wake them up, an accident happened. No matter how the male lead called out to them, they didn't react at all. This can only mean one thing. That is, they were killed by the invaders. Once you're done with your business, go check it out. I want to see which blind fool dared to break into my home and killed my guardian beast. Just when the protagonist was getting furious, the clanging noise nearby caught his attention. Turning around to take a look, they discovered that the three of them were trying hard to break open the door. Just when they thought they would soon break through the door and complete this secret realm task, the male protagonist surprisingly pushed the door open with one hand. The three of them were left dumbfounded at this scene. When they looked into the hall, they found a flower-like ice object in the center of the hall. As they got closer, what they saw was exactly the silver frost flower they were looking for. They thought that this trip had finally fulfilled the princess's orders. They would definitely be rewarded when they brought it back. But to their great surprise, they witnessed an extremely unfriendly scene. The male lead actually made a move. He got the silver frost flower and licked it right away. Not only that, he could even taste the flavor of the silver frost flower. Turns out, it tastes like peach. Seeing their surprised expressions, the main character asked, "Are you looking for him too? How dare someone try to steal from the main character? They must have lost their minds." However, facing Fan Luokue and his group, the male protagonist is not worried at all, because together, they can't defeat him. Moreover, the male protagonist reveals their princess's intentions. She just wants to forcibly take over his silver cold ice flower and make them scapegoats. Not only that, the male protagonist also wants their previous princess, Silver Cold Snow Ice, to confront him directly. Unfortunately, I learned from Fan Luokue that In Hanshua Bing has been in seclusion for a century, and cannot meet with the male lead at all. Seeing that the male lead showed no intention, Fan Luokue had no choice but to resort to force. Now it's done. Everything is out of the male lead's control. There's nothing he can do. The male protagonist had no choice but to bet with him. If he wins, In Han Binghua will be given to him. Otherwise, if he loses, he must leave here immediately. The rules of the bet are simple. As long as he can withstand 3 moves from the male protagonist, it counts as his victory. After hearing the male protagonist's words, Fan Luokue strikes first, launching an attack at the protagonist, swinging a slash towards him. But unfortunately, the protagonist easily dodges it. After the protagonist points it out, the first move is over. Next comes a sideways half-moon slash. But again, the protagonist dodges with a low bend. He calmly spoke about the second move. At the moment when the protagonist stood up, he reminded Fan Luokue, "You have one last chance." Hearing this, in that brief moment, he reacted, but unfortunately, he failed again. His third move was easily caught by the male lead with 2 fingers. He lost this match. So the male lead's silver cold ice flower could not be given to him. Then the male lead just exerted a bit of force. His saber was effortlessly broken by the male lead. This scene was something Fan Luokue never expected. He kept guessing how strong the male lead really was, but his 2 subordinates were very worried about him. After all, he had lost so badly that even his own blade broke. Facing the reality before him, Fan Luokue openly admitted that he had lost. Seeing that he didn't continue to argue, the protagonist gave him a teleportation scroll. It could directly send Fan Luokue and his party out. When he received the scroll from the protagonist, this left him feeling a bit incredulous. But towards the protagonist's kindness, he remained just as straightforward. Once we return to the palace, I will report your situation truthfully. After the princess said this, she turned and left with her follower. Perhaps they can find silver frost flowers elsewhere. After they left, the greedy night rain cicada asked the male lead, "Is that silver cold ice flower you mentioned really peach flavored? Can I have a taste too?" But in order for Jiang Yuetian to successfully break through, the male lead refused. He said, "Let's see how much is left when we return. I'll let you try then. For now, let's go meet your senior sisters. Let's head to the next place." After dealing with Fan Luokue and his group, the protagonist and his team leave the secret realm, and come before Zhang Ruoxue. She asks the protagonist why Fan Luokue and the others left early, but the protagonist doesn't explain much, just says they found what they were looking for, and let them leave first. After explaining, the male lead placed Lin Yuan into the space ring. Yi Yuchan was startled and quickly stopped him, but after learning that the male lead's space ring was special, Yi Yuchan finally felt relieved. The scene changes. They are sitting on a plane heading to the next destination. The destination is the Northern Ice Palace, a perfect ice and snow castle. When they arrived here, it was just a grand gate. It looked noble and elegant, brilliant and resplendent. However, Yi Yuchan was not happy at all, because what should have been a half-day journey, had turned into a 3-day detour due to the male lead's poor sense of direction. The key point was that the male lead shamelessly said, "I just wanted to show you the beautiful scenery of the snowman." Seeing that he couldn't do anything about the male lead, he had no choice but to obediently follow him into the Northern Ice Palace. When the male lead arrived at the entrance, he became quite sneaky, knocking in a secret code. Unexpectedly, someone inside responded to him. It seemed like they were eagerly awaiting his arrival. Finally, they matched the secret signal. The gate slowly opened. What they saw inside was a paradise on earth. Every girl there was as beautiful as a goddess, and the one leading them rushed straight toward the male lead. She clung to him entirely. Seeing this, Yi Yuchan was furious. Luckily, Zhang Ruoxue held her back. Otherwise, the consequences are easy to imagine. After they get intimate, the girl in the male lead's arms looks over at Yi Yuchan. Her eyes are like she's seeing a treasure. In the blink of an eye, he disappears from the male lead's arms. Even the male lead didn't notice. He actually ran behind Yi Yuchan and Zhang Ruoxue. Both hands were roaming all over them. Then they directly ignored the protagonist, and took the two of them inside, leaving the protagonist standing outside dumbfounded. Maybe this is the loneliness of the strong. The scene shifts. Now the two of them are enjoying unprecedented pleasure. Don't get the wrong idea. They're just taking a shower. It's just that there's an extra person to help them with a massage. After they finish their shower, there's a big feast prepared for them. It's simply a full-service experience. In the end, even when it comes to sleeping, there are girls to lull them to sleep. It's truly a queen-like treatment. And on the male lead side, at this time, he asked the girl where In Hanxue and the others had gone. The reply he received was the same as what Fan Luokue had said before. He has been in seclusion for a long time. He still hasn't come out. Upon hearing this, the male lead seemed to sense a hint of conspiracy. Various conspiracies kept surfacing. This made the male lead feel something was wrong. Now even his old lover, In Hanxubing, has met with an accident. Since announcing his seclusion, he hasn't left his retreat. Now the one in charge of the Beibing Palace is a man named Fan Donglin. Since he took office, he hasn't found any useful information. After hearing about these events, the male lead begins to ponder. In the end, he gathered some information. The male lead seems to have discovered some clues. From Qi Mengshu to Lanyu Tiangong, and then to the demon inside Yi Yuchan. Putting these things together, you will find that someone is deliberately targeting 21 Extreme. After hearing what the male lead said, the girl immediately grabbed his hand. He said, "This matter is no small thing. I might know someone who could give you some clues." Then he whispered a few words in the main character's ear. Now the main character had a direction to investigate. Just in case, he also gave the main character the Ice Palace's cold token. The guards wouldn't dare stop him with it. Looking at the token in his hand, the male lead is somewhat confused. "Shouldn't this be with your princess? How could it be with you?" But he didn't tell the male lead this secret. He said he would explain it to you later. The scene shifts. We see a pair of hands slowly opening the large door in front. Upon closer inspection, this person is Yi Yuchan, and there's a red carpet laid out in front of him. Above, a coffin is floating. Driven by curiosity, Yi Yuchan slowly walked forward. When he got to the coffin, he looked at the person lying inside. Yi Yuchan's face showed a look of horror. he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The person lying in the coffin was himself. Just then, the version of him in the coffin slowly opened his eyes. Suddenly, several blood-red tentacles lunged toward Yi Yuzhen. Before Yi Yuzhen could react, the tentacles tightly wrapped around him. No matter how hard he struggled, it was useless. In the end, he was brought face to face with himself. Then he was so scared that he immediately woke up from his dream. The vivid scene left him unable to calm down for a long time. The male lead and Zhang Ruoxue were very worried. They asked him what he had dreamed of to be so scared. Yi Yuchan did not hide anything either. He told them everything he dreamed about in detail. Hearing this, the male lead immediately began to comfort him, saying it's okay, don't be afraid, dreams are the opposite of reality. But that scene and sensation felt too real. It didn't feel like a dream at all. In order to dispel his thoughts, the male lead continued to comfort Yi Yuchan. In the end, under the male lead's comfort, she gradually regained her calm. A nightmare quietly revealed Yi Yuchan's true identity. Perhaps she was not a time traveler. However, under the repeated comfort of the male lead, he gradually dismissed this thought. At this moment, the male lead was thinking of leaving the room, to explain the techniques to Zhang Ruoxue on this full moon night. But Yi Yuchan looked at the male lead with her big eyes, as if hoping he would stay and keep her company. Zhang Ruoxue, who was nearby, also sensed her intention, and stated that she had already memorized the techniques herself. He can just go back and meditate on his own. As for Zhang Ruoxue's kind intentions, the male lead naturally wouldn't refuse. He immediately took off his shirt, and jumped into Yi Yuchan's bed. With me here, no ghosts or monsters dare to come. You should go to sleep. In the blink of an eye, half an hour passed. Neither of them could fall asleep. Seeing that they couldn't fall asleep for a long time, Yi Yuchan suggested playing truth or dare. However, because it was the middle of the night, playing dare would only make it harder to sleep. So the male lead decided to play truth instead. As soon as the male lead agreed, Yi Yuchan immediately turned to face the male lead with a smile. However, before Yi Yuchan could ask, the male lead blurted out, "A string of numbers. I don't know if any of you understand, but let me know." Faced with the male lead's random numbers, Yi Yuchan was initially confused, but after understanding the meaning, she immediately showed a disgusted expression, and pressed a pillow against the male lead's face, who told him to act indecently in front of her. As he talked trash and faced Yi Yuchan's counterattack, the male lead didn't stay idle either. He held down her waist with one hand, then he gave a strong pull, and threw Yi Yuchan onto the bed. He asked, "Did you really transmigrate here?" Faced with the male lead's aggressive approach, Yi Yuchan was a bit overwhelmed, but she still answered his question truthfully. After learning she had indeed transmigrated, the male lead immediately felt at ease. Then Yi Yuchan asked the male lead, "You said before that you were Emperor 1. Is that true? When you were Emperor 1, did you have a lot of confidants around you?" When Yi Yuchan asked this, the male lead couldn't help but recall the past. Yes, there were many, but there's only one true love. As soon as she heard the words, true love, Yi Yuchan's mood immediately dropped. Then she turned and said, "I'm tired. Thank you for keeping me company. Let's call it a day." Facing the jealous Yi Yuchan, the male lead didn't pursue the matter further. But for the things in that night rain cicada dream, the male lead finds them somewhat unbelievable. Could he really be him? To get to the bottom of the truth, the male lead decides to visit his tomb. When the male lead opens his eyes again, his soul has already arrived in a strange place. Looking at the tomb in front of him, the male lead felt a bit lost. Before long, he stepped into the tomb before him. Stories that have been sealed for a long time will eventually be revealed. Gazing at the tomb of his beloved, the male lead's feelings were complex. Before long, he stepped into the tomb in front of him. He arrived at a place that felt both familiar and strange. A world the protagonist least wanted to come to. Looking around here, everything seemed normal. Perhaps he was overthinking. The night rain and cicadas probably had nothing to do with him. It's time to move on to the next place. But before setting off, let's first meet the princess of the North Ice Palace. Then, under the guidance of a girl, the male lead arrived at the center of the North Ice Palace. However, a familiar figure approached. That person was Fan Luokue. He asked the male lead how he got in. But the male lead didn't answer him. It was just a simple greeting. Eventually, it was through the girl's notification that Fan Luokue learned the male lead came in through connections. Since you know each other, why not have Captain Fan take him to meet the princess? Upon learning the male lead's purpose for coming, Fan Luokue was somewhat surprised. He then informed the male lead, The princess is currently in seclusion for training. Please come back in 7 days if you wish to see her. Although the male lead already knew this would be the outcome, he still politely replied to Fan Luokue. Then he turned around and left. This further confirmed to him that there was something wrong with the princess. The scene shifts. A man is seen holding 5 silver ice flowers in his hands. And this person is none other than the current princess of the Northern Ice Palace, Fan Dongying. As for the 5 silver frost flowers in his hand, they were painstakingly found by Fan Luokue. At this moment, he clenched his fist, because he could finally avenge his mother. As hatred clouded his mind, a hand helped him up. This person was from the Northern Ice. The current princess is also his father. Moreover, Fan Luokue detailed the process of meeting the male lead to him. Upon learning this, Fan Dongying said to him with a hypocritical face, "Good. This is something Wei Fu will send someone to investigate. You should announce this to the public in the next few days." Wei Fu is in seclusion for 7 days, and will not see anyone. When Fan Luokue heard this, he felt that something bad was about to happen. The scene shifted. At that moment, Fan Dongying was leisurely feeding the fish, and was not in seclusion for cultivation. He even instructed his subordinates to follow the male lead and the others. Just a moment ago, the male lead and the others had already left Beibing Palace. Just now, the fish was still lively. Now it has been poisoned by him. As the conspiracy gradually comes to light, can the male lead overcome this challenge? That depends on him. At this moment, he is preparing to head to the next location, sensing that danger is imminent. The male lead specifically reminds Yu-chan and the others to brace themselves, because just now, the male lead discovered several little creatures following him closely with the divine stone. So, if nothing unexpected happens, there will definitely be an accident. Soon after, their lower bodies exploded. However, they weren't seriously harmed. They just landed on a relatively thick layer of snow. When Yu-chan woke up from her coma, he found himself lying in an unfamiliar place, and saw Zhang Ruoxue unconscious beside him. He quickly ran over to check on her, but who would have thought that as soon as they woke up, they started vomiting. It seems they felt dizzy from the crash. But luckily, Yu-chan was already used to such situations, so he was fine when he woke up. At the moment, Yu-chan hasn't spotted the male lead. She keeps calling his name. Suddenly, the snow beneath their feet starts to rise. It seems like something is about to break through the surface. Next, the male lead pops his head out of the snow, looking as if he's really enjoying himself. However, before he can react, the person who ambushed them appears. They are the assassins sent by Fan Dongying. Unfortunately, their trap failed to kill the protagonist. But the next second, things got a bit weird. The blonde little guy ended up lying on the leader. The girl on the side, not bothered by the drama, quietly watched them getting along. This silly combination was a bit too much for the protagonist. And Yu-chan directly hid behind the protagonist. When Huang Mao realized it was not the time for love and romance, he instantly disappeared from his spot. He appeared in front of the male lead. One hand gently lifted his chin. He carefully observed the male lead's face. He couldn't really be, right? But later, the 3 of them came clean. They revealed the name of their group. We are the trio symbolizing love and peace. Flower Warriors. This sight gave the male lead goosebumps. He couldn't bear to watch. He immediately pulled out a rocket launcher and fired at them. Unfortunately, the shot didn't cause them any real harm. When the smoke cleared, the 3 of them were standing there unharmed, facing the male lead's attack. They did not rush to retaliate. Instead, they introduced themselves to the male lead one by one. First up is this seemingly beautiful cross-dressing guy, who is referred to as Dream Girl. Next is the leader of the trio, the guy Edward, who possesses Du Xingqi. The last one looks the most normal of all. He is the self-proclaimed Prince of Mirth. That's just ridiculous. What happens when a bizarre male lead encounters a peculiar assassin? What kind of experience will that be? To be honest, even the male lead can't handle it. Anyone watching would feel uncomfortable, given the attitude of the male lead and his companions. The blonde nearby is very angry. He raised his bow and arrow and shot at the protagonist. Even the sword was in the shape of a heart. Luckily, the protagonist reacted in time, and pinned down Yu-chan and the others to avoid the strike. Although they dodged the sword attack, the shockwave still caused them significant harm. Seeing how powerful the opponent was, Yu-chan looked pitifully at the male lead, realizing they were too strong. If a fight breaks out, I'll just be a burden to you. How about you put me in the space ring? Zhang Ruoxue, on the other hand, was thinking about fighting them to the end. However, her cultivation couldn't quickly return to its former state. Hearing his thoughts, the male lead certainly wouldn't let them down. He then took their hands and said that this flash charge energy could temporarily boost their cultivation. But there is a time limit. It's rare to encounter someone with decent skills to practice on. Let's experience it in reality. Let's fully enjoy the thrill of battling a strong opponent. In an instant, their cultivation level rose to the void stage. Before the battle, the male lead reminded them to be quick and decisive. They mustn't linger in battle. However, the trio nearby heard every word the male lead said clearly, mocking them for being slow-witted. But as for their taunts, the protagonist didn't mind. He simply turned around to look at them. During this time, he also arranged to meet Yi Yu-chan here. After saying this, in the blink of an eye, the protagonist appeared in front of the blonde guy. He moved so fast that even the guy didn't have time to react. He raised his fist, the size of a clay pot, and struck at the blonde thug. For messing with my apprentice. Now I'll return the favor with a punch. That punch landed squarely on the thug's face. From the way his face contorted, you could tell this punch was no joke. After knocking him back, the protagonist decided to use him as practice for his apprentice. Then another punch landed on the snowy ground. The immense power directly caused the snow to crack. In this brief moment, the male lead has set up a great formation. He sealed himself and the remaining two little ones inside the formation. This way, they can't interfere with their disciples' battlefield. Looking at the great formation before him, Edward quickly instructed Dream Girl to stop the male lead. But this formation isn't something a void tool can intercept. Manhwa can't stop it at all. Once the male lead sets up the formation, it's his time to shine. Facing the male lead's moves, Edward already recognized that his strength is on par with his own, so he let Manhwa act when the time is right. While he faced the male lead head-on, even though he wasn't confident about it, how would he know if he didn't try? Then, several bullets shot out from his hands, but unfortunately, they couldn't even break the protagonist's shield. It seems the gap between them is truly vast. Seeing the opponent was about to engage in a shootout, the protagonist took out a Gatling gun and returned fire. Even Edward's proudest ammunition was no match for this. The male protagonist's firepower overwhelmingly crushed him. This was something he never expected. In the face of such firepower, he actually lost to the male protagonist, due to his inadequate firepower. With a bang, all the bullets shot towards his chest, blasting him into the snow on the other side. That scene was simply unbearable to watch. It was already ridiculous when the male lead pulled out the rocket launcher. I didn't expect things to get even more absurd later. Now facing a formidable enemy, the male lead actually brought out a Gatling gun, and he overwhelmed the opponent with firepower. He directly blasted him into the snowy ground on the other side. I thought this would solve a minor issue, but when the protagonist turned around, he sensed something was off. Countless shots of artillery were coming at him, but the protagonist blocked them one by one. Facing such a sharp offensive, the protagonist couldn't help but marvel at his own reflexes. The barrage of fire relentlessly aimed at the protagonist. Edward dared not let his guard down for a second. After all, even Fan Dongyin feared the protagonist, and has such powerful mechanical weapons. So he has to give it his all. Otherwise, he might lose his life here. No one knows how long he kept firing. He only stopped when he ran out of ammo. That's when he finally halted. Watching the explosion in the distance, Edward believed the protagonist couldn't have survived. Then, a dramatic turn. He walked away from the battlefield without looking back. The sound of explosions continued behind him. He thought he'd pull it off looking cool. But unexpectedly, the protagonist wasn't hurt at all. He even mocked him, saying real men never look back. You're still too green. If it weren't for someone kind-hearted like me, you're going to suffer a loss like this. After saying that, the protagonist vanished on the spot. All that was left was a blur of his afterimage. Before he could react, the protagonist was already behind him. Then, the protagonist charged up and kicked straight at him. The speed was so fast, it crackled with lightning. A solid kick, leaving him no chance to defend himself. Once again, he was kicked flying. Back to that familiar place. These three don't feel like truly evil people. They're even too pure. With such power, why do they still serve others? Thinking over and over, the protagonist still couldn't find the right answer. Besides, the protagonist and his group just arrived here. Whose path did they block? I can't figure it out anyway. Let's just get the answer from the three of them. Several energy spheres hurled at Edward. With a bang, they exploded on him. The protagonist wasn't idle either. He took a running stance, ready to return to the starting point. He kicked off with both feet, and the protagonist flew over once again. Meanwhile, on Edward's side, facing the protagonist's relentless bombardment, he had no ability to defend. He could only watch the bombardment coming, and take the hits. At this point, he was already lying on the ground, barely alive. The male protagonist also came to his side, facing him lying on the ground. The male protagonist did not believe he was dead, and he did not disappoint the male protagonist. His entire being floated in the air, accompanied by red lightning.